These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are Gabi.com. Gabi takes the pain out of insurance shopping. More info at Gabi.com/Thom. Bowl and Branch Sheets, crafted for the common good. More info at bowlandbranch.com, code Thom. CB Distillery for sleeping. More info at cbdistillery.com, code Thom. The Clean Phone Pro, phone sanitizer and charger. More info at thenewdealshop.com. ExpressVPN, the VPN that just works. More information at expressvpn.com/Thom. And Teeth, Smarter Pet Dental Health. For more information, teethhealth.com, code Thom.
We say fight back!
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Cokeland, The Secret History of Coke Industries and Corporate Power in America by Christopher Leonard. This is from the preface. On May 18th, 1981, 4 Wall Street bankers traveled to Wichita, Kansas. They went there to make an offer to Charles Koch, the CEO of an obscure mid-size energy company. The bankers from Morgan Stanley wanted to convince Koch to take his family's company public, offering shares for sale on the New York Stock Exchange. Their deal was squarely in line with the conventional wisdom of corporate America at the time. Going public was seen as a natural progression for companies like Koch Industries, offering them access to big pools of money and promising enormous paydays for the existing team of executives. All it required from the CEO was to surrender control. Morgan Stanley, in return, would collect a small fortune in fees. Charles Koch was 45 years old. He had run Koch Industries since he was 32 when his father died suddenly. He was trim, tall, and had an athlete's build. He spoke quietly in meetings and seemed almost passive. The bankers laid out their plan to take Koch public. They revealed what, to most executives at least, might have been the most significant detail. If Charles Koch agreed to the deal, he could earn $20 million overnight. The bankers seemed incredulous when they prepared a confidential memo about Koch's reaction. "He does not want this cash," the memo reported. Charles Koch calmly explained to them why their offer made no sense. His company was breathtakingly profitable. It operated in vital, deeply complex corners of the American energy industry. During the 1980s, Koch Industries was the largest purchaser and transporter of U.S. crude oil. It owned an oil refinery. It employed teams of commodity traders who bought and sold a wildly diverse menu of raw materials and financial products, from gasoline to paper futures contracts. This might have encouraged most CEOs to take their company public. Koch Industries, however, did not want outsiders to know how much money its traders were earning. Taking the company public would expose too many of its secrets. The memo said, certain of Koch's commodity traders are particularly worried that their high salaries, once disclosed to the public, would be used against them by their trading partners. Secrecy was a strategic necessity for Koch Industries. Charles Koch did not want to surrender it. He also didn't want to surrender control. He had a specific, clear vision of how to run his company, and he didn't need Wall Street investors to interfere. If the bankers expected Charles Koch to go along with the conventional wisdom of their time, then they, like so many outsiders, did not understand him. Beneath his low-key veneer, Charles Koch was, at his core, a fighter. He had unmovable ideas about how things should be, and he did not back down when challenged. When he was challenged by his own brothers for control of Koch Industries, he fought them in a bitter legal battle that lasted decades. When he was challenged by members of a powerful labor union during his first years as CEO, he fought them even as they committed an act of industrial sabotage that nearly destroyed Koch's oil refinery. When the FBI and the U.S. Department of Justice launched a criminal investigation into Koch Industries' oil gathering business, Charles Koch fought them with every legal and political tool at his disposal. When a liberal Congress and President Barack Obama sought to impose regulations on the fossil fuel industry to control greenhouse gas emissions, Charles Koch fought them in ways that changed U.S. politics. In each of these fights, Charles Koch prevailed. When Charles Koch dismissed the bankers in 1981, it was just a small skirmish in the larger war to control Koch Industries. After prevailing in that fight, he created a company that was true to his vision. He avoided the snares that entangled many publicly traded companies that report their financial results to investors every 3 months. Koch Industries didn't have to think quarter to quarter. The company thinks year to year. An internal think tank and deal-making committee called the Development Group will sometimes think through a business deal on a timeline measured in decades. This long-term view made Koch more nimble where other companies stumbled. In 2003, for example, Koch Industries bought a group of money-losing fertilizer plants when no publicly traded company was willing to take the risk. Today, those plants are as profitable as a broken ATM machine that spews out cash around the clock. Unlike publicly traded companies, Koch Industries does not pay out rich dividends to investors. Charles Koch insists on reinvesting at least 90% of the company's profits, fueling its constant expansion. This strategy laid the foundation for decades of continuous growth. Koch Industries expanded continuously by purchasing other companies and branching out into new industries. It specialized in the kind of businesses that are indispensable to modern civilization, but which most consumers never directly encounter. The company is embedded in the hidden infrastructure of everyday life. Millions of people use Koch's products without ever seeing Koch's name attached. Koch refines and distributes fossil fuels, from gasoline to jet fuel, on which the global economy is dependent. Koch is the world's third largest producer of nitrogen fertilizer, which is the cornerstone of our modern food system. Koch makes the synthetic materials used in baby diapers, waistbands, and carpets. It makes the chemicals used for plastic bottles and pipes. It owns Georgia Pacific, which makes the wall panels, beams, and plywood required to build homes and office buildings. It makes napkins, paper towels, stationery, newspaper, and personal hygiene products. Koch Industries owns a network of commodities trading offices in Houston, Moscow, Geneva, and elsewhere, which are the circulatory system of modern finance. The book, Kochland, by Christopher Leonard.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Wow, what a debate, right? Or was it a debate at all? What an insane night. Happy Thursday. Professor Richard Wolff will be with us in our second hour today. But beyond that, let's talk about what happened, what the state of America is. Trump's rage tweeting this morning, or yesterday, he apparently got his steroid shot this morning because he was nuts, and he was calling into TV show after TV show. Apparently hasn't done his hair yet. Phil Proctor of the Firesign Theater just sent around some little memes that he'd collected on the internet. One I actually found fascinating, a tweet by Jennifer Wright, that if you look at art, like from the 14th to the 18th century, this is what she says. A fun art history fact. Flies are used to represent rot, wasting away, decay, death, and melancholia. A fly hovering over a church official, this is in a painting from that era, a fly hovering over a church official or a nobleman indicates disfavor with the king or corruption and dereliction of duty. The salty liberal tweets, if that fly laid eggs in Pence's hair, he better carry them to full term, which brings up a whole, here's another one, that fly is Mike Pence's only black friend. But the he better carry them to full term thing is really, we're looking at the American Taliban here. Back in 2009, Barack Obama signed an executive order that reversed an executive order that George W. Bush had signed as a tip of the hat to the American Taliban, that said that it was illegal to do any kind of research using stem cells derived from abortions. Bush put a stop to that. In 2009, Obama reversed that and said, abortion is legal. If the stem cells are valuable for scientific research and they could save lives, go ahead and use them. Regeneron started using these stem cells, and they developed a couple of monoclonal antibodies that were given to Trump that Trump is now saying saved his life. Are you following this? I mean, this is how crazy it gets. So anyhow, there's that, and then of course, the debate last night. The New York Times, I thought, did a really, really good job on this. They didn't even bother to try saying, "Oh, well, Pence said this, but Harris said that." No, this is what the New York Times had to say. That quote, Pence deployed a number of misleading or inaccurate arguments. These are about the coronavirus response. On the Trump administration coronavirus response, quote, exaggerated or mischaracterized the Obama administration's record in dealing with smaller scale pandemics and employed false, misleading, or exaggerated statements in debating abortion, climate change, and the administration's record in fighting the Islamic State. I mean, there was such a flurry of lies from Mike Pence. There was so much BS that it was actually attracting flies. And, or not metaphorically anyway. Pence said that the Trump response to the coronavirus was the greatest national mobilization since World War II. No, not so much. He says, I think the American people know that this is a president who has put the health of America first, and the American people, I believe with my heart. He's so smarmy, right? You look up smarmy, unctuous in the dictionary, and there's a picture of Mike Pence. I believe in my heart that the American people can be proud of the sacrifices they have made. Nick Cordero's wife, widow, did I don't know if it was TikTok or Instagram or whatever, did a little video on this a couple days ago saying, he's the 41-year-old Broadway star and athlete who died of coronavirus after having lost a leg to it. They had to saw off his leg because of a blood clot, because coronavirus is basically a, inflammation of the vascular system disease. She said, it upended our lives. It dominated our lives, I think was the phrase she used, because Trump said, don't let it dominate your life. Pence sat there and he says, President Trump and I have plans to improve health care and to protect pre-existing conditions for every American. Right. As they and roughly 20 Republican attorneys general from Republican-controlled states are arguing at the Supreme Court, a case that will be heard a week after the election, that Obamacare in its entirety needs to be struck down. It's mind-boggling. Meanwhile, in Detroit, this is just breaking news. The Detroit News just broke this story like a half hour ago. The FBI says they thwarted a militia plot to kill or kidnap the governor of Michigan, Gretchen Whitmer. I mean, this is where we're at. This is the crazy stuff that this guy has been spreading. This whole authoritarian shtick that Trump is promoting. And then Mike Lee comes out, the senator from Utah, the Republican, senator from Utah, and says, oh, we're not a democracy, we're a republic. The implicit, therefore, being, democracy is where the majority of people decide things. And, I mean, this is the old, Joe McCarthy started this back in the 50s, when he said, don't ever say Democratic Party, always say Democrat Party, with the emphasis on the rat. That was his expression. And the reason why, he said, was because democratic sounds too nice. People like democracy. People like democratic things. You want to be democratic with people around you, right? You want to share and share alike. So don't use that word to describe the Democratic Party. Call it the Democrat Party. And don't call America a democracy, because that sounds like democratic. Call America a republic. I mean, the fact of the matter is that at the founding of this republic, the words democracy and republic were essentially interchangeable. It wasn't until the 1950s that we started separating these two words. It wasn't until the 1950s that we put God into the Pledge of Allegiance. It wasn't until the 1950s that Republicans started refusing to say the name of the Democratic Party like it's some kind of weird tick. Like they're afraid to say it out loud. I can't say Democratic. That might burn my mouth. God might strike me down. And, Pence did it last night again. He made some Democrat reference that should have been Democratic. Meanwhile, Trump this morning, clearly got his steroid shot. He says that Bill Barr can only be considered a successful attorney general if he puts Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama in jail. And Joe Biden. He called Kamala Harris a monster and a communist. He says he knows he's winning the election right now because he's got support from people who own boats. Which reminds you of the old Jack Kennedy saying, a rising tide lifts all boats. And the response to that, great news if you own a boat. Trump said again that he's done more for black Americans than any president since Abraham Lincoln. And he went off on another rant about Hillary Clinton and her emails. And which has been investigated to death. I mean, we spent tens of millions of dollars investigating this to discover that there's no there. But the Republicans, they've got a bone. They're going to hang on to it. They're going to keep gnawing away at this thing. So anyhow, I'm curious what you thought last night. The other thing that I noticed, and Louise noticed actually immediately, was Pence's habit of interrupting Kamala Harris, interrupting the woman. And then on CNN, Rick Santorum interrupts Gloria Borger. I mean, it's just nuts. It's just nuts.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
But anyhow, I'll pick up your phone calls after this break, and we can continue this conversation. What do you think happened of consequence last night? I think the fly was the most consequential thing. And welcome back. Paul in Lucerne, California. Hey, Paul, what's on your mind?
Hey, Tom. I'd like to talk about misogyny in our culture. And me and my wife watched the debates back-to-back last night because she wasn't feeling good last week. And the way that Kamala had to deal with the interruption, she had to be super polite. The way they critiqued her versus Joe was totally held her to a way higher standard. It's not fair. I mean, if she was, she had to hold back last night. She could have eviscerated him, but if she did, she would have came off as the B word or mean and nasty. But that's a problem because we can't have two standards. You're an equal. You're not. A man is not better than a woman. And that's the way Pence treated her last night. And he treated the moderator the same way.
Yeah. Well, they're both women. And right. Kamala Harris, of course, is a woman of color. But, I think that, Mike Pence lives in a world, grew up in a world, whatever. He's up to his eyeballs in Christian Taliban stuff.
Religious theocracy is his whole thing. That's why they presidency.
He couldn't have shown up to talk to her if Mother wasn't in the room.
Yeah, I thought maybe they were going to put her in a plexiglass box. That might have been an exception because technically they wouldn't be in the same room together. She'd be in like a phone booth.
Yeah. The other thing that's going nuts on this is that Mike Pence's eyes were red. I tweeted it. I said, "Oh my God, Mike Pence's eyes are red," and they were. And that's a symptom of COVID. And
I think
and then the fly shows up, right?
I think Trump tried to give joke over it on purpose.
You know,
I'm sorry,
it's
but I
entirely
do.
possible. I can't read his mind, but he's enough of a petty and vindictive man. Paul, thanks for the call. You know, who knows? Alfredo in Mountain View, California. Hey, Alfredo, what's on your mind?
Yeah, Tom, thank you for taking my call. Yeah, can you please clarify, you know, the GOP in Pennsylvania, I heard, is trying to form this so-called integrity committee to have complete oversight on mail-in ballots, which sounds to me like a sham. Yeah, so can you clarify what's going on there, and I take my answer off the air? Thanks.
Sure. Yeah. The president is not elected by the people. The president is elected by the Electoral College, and the Electoral College can be appointed or put forward. The electors can be put forward by the state legislature using any criteria they want. This is in the Constitution. It was clarified in some election legislation passed in 1877 or 78 after the election of 1876, in which the Democrat won the election but didn't end up in the White House, and and was amplified by Bush v. Gore in 2000. So what Pennsylvania is doing, what the Republicans in Pennsylvania are doing right now, are preparing to steal an election, in my opinion. And this is something I wrote about back in March. I've talked about it numerous times. They're going to claim fraud, and then they're going to put forward, and they're going to say, therefore, we can't tell who actually won, so we're just going to put forward Donald Trump. And they probably have the legal right to do that. So we'll just see how it shakes out. A lot's going to depend on how strongly Republicans are going to stand with Trump. We'll be right back. Share the Thom Hartmann Program with your friends. We're available on SiriusXM, Free Speech TV, Pacifica, commercial stations nationwide, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, on the Thom Hartmann app, and you can even tell your smart speaker to listen to the Thom Hartmann Program. We have a new video up over at thomhartmann.com for people who are regular supporters of our program, and the essence of it is, you know, I use a couple of examples. There's hundreds of them out there. In one case, Alabama is preparing to execute a man who was not guilty of the crime that he committed with a relatively high level of certainty, but still they're gonna kill this guy, an African American. And the other story out of New York State, where the police officers hogtied this guy, arms, elbows behind him, tied his legs together, and then threw him down a flight of stairs, mangled his face. He looked he was totally beaten. 12 hours later, he commits suicide in his cell. How is it possible that our prisons do this kind of stuff? Because the 13th Amendment says that slavery is still legal in the United States. You have no rights if you've been convicted of a crime. We need to amend the Constitution. Check it out at thomhartmann.com. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Just a couple of points. Well, I think I've probably made most of the points I want to make. Mike Lee, this is what Mike Lee said. He said, democracy isn't the objective. See, he's echoing, 3 generations now, or 3 generations now of Republicans, going back to Joe McCarthy. The word democracy appears nowhere in the Constitution, perhaps because our form of government is not a democracy, it's a constitutional republic. Well, no, it's both. We vote. In democracy, the hallmark of a democracy is elections. Now, you could argue that the president is not elected in a democratic system, but we've largely fixed that so that the president is elected in a democratic way. Anyhow, Mike Lee says, to me it matters. It should matter to anyone who worries about the excessive accumulation of power in the hands of the few. Oh, you mean the rich donors to the Republican Party who are funding all this stuff and are saying, and the fossil fuel billionaires, et cetera, and are saying, no, it's not a democracy. And then he goes on to say, democracy isn't the objective. Liberty, peace, and prosperity are. We want the human condition to flourish. Rank democracy can thwart that. This is a very dangerous argument that these guys are making. It's it's not a good thing. Mark in Sauk City, Wisconsin. Hey, Mark, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. And the other fly in the room was, when the fly wasn't there, was Mike Pence's propensity to not answer the question that was asked and answer whatever popped into his foul little brain. That, and as getting a little bit more nerdy in my advancing years, turning to the Federalist Papers, I mean, it's clear that that even Hamilton, who was more aristocratic minded, warned against the excesses of aristocracy in our republic. He warned against, in '75, he warned against men that were more concerned with self and enriching themselves, even at the expense of selling us out to foreign powers. I won't bore people with the direct quotes, but I mean that he was deeply, you could see his deep concern of that, and that especially how he closed it out is that there's enemies of our republic in it, that there's powerful enemies that we have, and that it's how he ended his Federalist paper in '85. It's I dread more the consequences of new attempts, because I know that powerful individuals in this and other states are enemies to a general national government in any possible shape. And that's what Mike Lee and his fellows represent. I mean, they're enemies of our national government. I mean, they're enemies of our democratic republic.
Yeah, I agree, and I think that they are proclaiming it. I mean, Mike Lee is just coming right out and saying, "I don't believe in democracy." And the subtext of that, obviously, is if Donald Trump loses the popular vote by 5 million or 10 million this time around, tough luck. We're still going to put him into the White House. It's amazing. Mark, thank you. James in Chicago. Hey, James, what's up?
Hi, Tom. I thought the debate went well. I thought Kamala did good, but I think there was one question where she had a chance for a knockout, and she blew it. And that was when the moderator asked, Pence, how would you and Trump preserve the Affordable Care Act? And right then and there, I said, he's not going to answer it, and don't let him get away. And sure enough, he detoured to talk about the judges, and Kamala took it hook, line, and sinker, and never went back to him answering that question. And that's and it blew my mind, but that was otherwise she did good. But that was one of the most important questions of the night, and they let that one get away.
So it's well, and that's what Pence did, and then he went to, you're trying to pack the court. You want to pack the court. Well, you say you're not going to pack the court, and she had the information for the rebuttal, which is, you want to talk about packing the court? Talk about the last 2 years of the Obama administration, Mitch McConnell refusing to allow any judges to go on the court so that the Republicans could pack the court if they won the election, which they did and they've done now. A third of all your federal judges have been appointed by Donald Trump. That's called packing the court. Putting what was it, Neil Gorsuch on the court as a replacement for Scalia instead of Merrick Garland. That's packing the court. What we are talking about, those of us who are saying that the size of the court should be expanded, is not packing the court, it's expanding the court. And expanding the court is actually, I think, an important and necessary thing at this point in time, because the court has seized so much power. They assert more power than the legislative branch or the executive branch. And, it's not the way that it was intended.
Can I say one more thing? Music. Also, she should have shot him down when he was talking about the tax, because it's my understanding that the wealthy will keep theirs, but the average person will lose theirs. So
oh yeah, killing the Affordable Care Act is going to be a huge tax cut for very wealthy people. I'll talk about that when we come back on the other side of the break. James, thank you for the call. We'll be right back.
To the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Your thoughts on last night's debate and where we go forward, and Donald Trump's rants this morning, and the presidential debate is getting weird.
Today's book in our book club is The Hidden History of the War on Voting, Who Stole Your Vote and How to Get It Back, by this guy, Thom Hartmann. This is from chapter 1, or from the introduction, actually. In 2016, 6% of Americans who were eligible to vote nominated Donald Trump as the GOP's presidential candidate. It was 8% for Hillary Clinton on the Democratic side. Trump went on to be elected president by 26% of eligible voters. The modern American oligarchs have largely stayed in power using three simple elements: explicit and overt racism, massive disinformation campaigns, and voter suppression. No ideas, no push for better schools, hospitals, airports, roads, or bridges, or reform of our health, energy, or financial systems. No promise of more and better jobs. None of these staples of past presidential campaigns can be found in pretty much any Republican advertising today. Instead, the public Republican message is all about race, or the subset of race, religion. Muslim stands in for brown Arab in GOP speak, and immigration, aka brown people from south of our border, and socialism. Meanwhile, Republican secretaries of state across the nation are vigorously purging voters from the rolls. Over 17 million, more than 10% of America's active voters, in just the 2016-2018 period, according to NBC News. After the 5 Republican appointees on the U.S. Supreme Court gutted the Voting Rights Act in 2013, 14 GOP-controlled states moved within a year, some within days, to restrict access to the vote, particularly for communities of color, students, and retired people. In North Carolina, for example, 158 polling places were permanently closed in the 40 counties with the most African-American voters just before the 2016 election, leading to a 16% decline in African-American early voting in that state. An MIT study found that nationwide, Hispanic voters wait 150% longer in line than white voters, and black voters can expect to wait 200% longer in line to vote. In Indiana, then Governor Mike Pence's new rigorous voter ID law caused an 11.5% drop in African-American voting. Students are suing for their right to vote, and retired people who no longer drive but care passionately about their Social Security and Medicare are being turned away at the polls by the hundreds of thousands because their driver's licenses have expired. The obvious failure of 40-plus years of Reaganomics and GOP policies to maintain a functional middle class in America has been a problem for the modern GOP. In 1974, for example, the GOP had outright control of only 7 states. The message, elect us and we'll help the rich people, just didn't generally resonate with American voters. It's the reason why, outside of the fluke elections of 46 and 52, Democrats controlled the House of Representatives outright for 3 generations, from 1933 to 1996, and controlled the Senate for most of that time. Desperate to win the presidency for the GOP in 1968, Richard Nixon went so far as to commit treason by torpedoing a peace deal with President Lyndon Johnson that President Lyndon Johnson had worked out with the North and South Vietnamese. According to Abul Hassan Bani Sadr, then president of Iran, Ronald Reagan did the same thing by cutting a deal with Iran whereby they would hold on to the U.S. embassy hostages until after the 1980 presidential election, torpedoing Jimmy Carter's chances of re-election. But in 2000, the GOP changed tactics. After Reagan was almost busted for his part in Iran-Contra, he testified that he had forgotten about details of the program more than 80 times. His growing Alzheimer's spared him an indictment. They realized that getting busted for treason wasn't worth the risk. They needed a plan B, and it was deliciously simple. If most voters don't like what you're selling, then just don't let them vote. Paul Weyrich promoted this idea back in 1980 when he was campaigning for Reagan after co-founding the Heritage Foundation. And indeed, many Republican luminaries, such as William Rehnquist, who went from serving the GOP by standing in polling places and intimidating Hispanic and Native American voters in the 1960s, to becoming Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, rose up through the ranks by participating in Republican-run voter intimidation schemes. Voter suppression became the foundational go-to tactic for the GOP in 2000. Although the GOP attacked Democratic presidential nominee Al Gore with smear and innuendo, ridiculing him for helping write the legislation that created the modern internet, for example, the main thing that got George W. Bush into the White House was voter suppression. His brother, Florida Governor Jeb Bush, and Bush's Secretary of State, Katherine Harris, threw somewhere between 20,000 and 90,000 African-American voters off the rolls. They were able to get the vote close enough. The 5 Republican appointees to the Supreme Court functionally awarded Bush the presidency. The BBC covered this in 2001 in 2 major investigative reports that were seen all over the world, except on any American media. By 2016, the Republican Party had fine-tuned its voter suppression and intimidation systems to the point that they ran like well-oiled machines in nearly 30 states. Between the 2012 and 2016 presidential elections, for example, Ohio had purged more than 2 million voters from its rolls, the vast majority, more than 2 to 1, in heavily African-American and Hispanic counties. The 5 Republican appointees on the Supreme Court ruled in 2017 that they could keep it up. And other states have since adopted their new tactic of caging voters. The book, The Hidden History of the War on Voting, by me.
On the Science Revolution this week, Donald Trump has tested positive for COVID-19. What does that mean for America? Dr. Michael Mann is here on Greenland and how it's set to lose more ice than in the past 12,000 years. This is a climate disaster. Gene Ross from National Nurses United drops by about the widespread failure to track and report data on COVID-19 deaths, testing, and infections. Kevin Camps from Beyond Nuclear joins me from New Mexico, begetting a radioactive waste dump. And in Geeky Science, an Awe Walk, AWE, an Awe Walk may do wonders for all of us right now. Tune into the Science Revolution wherever fine podcasts are available. Welcome back. So Bernie Sanders gets a cute little bird, and Mike Pence gets a poop-seeking fly, right? What could be more appropriate? I mentioned what would happen if Obamacare gets repealed by the Supreme Court in, 5 weeks from now. And it's pretty straightforward. The richest 0.1% of households, people whose annual income is over $3 million a year, would receive about a $200,000 a year tax cut. And people who are earning more than $1 million a year would receive a $40,000 a year tax cut. That's how much taxes were increased on people making over $1 million or over $3 million to pay for health care for low-income people through the Affordable Care Act. Also, the pharmaceutical industry, Big Pharma, the drug manufacturers, would pay $2.8 billion less in taxes every year. So you've got billionaires saying to Republicans, you got to get rid of this. I want that $200,000, or you multimillionaires. And you've got billionaires in the pharma company saying, we want those billions of dollars. So just, because the caller just before the break brought that up, I just thought I would lay it out. Leslie on Lopez Island, Washington. Hey, Leslie, what's on your mind?
Hi, Tom. Well, I think the Democrats are being so nice, and the one thing that comes to my mind every time Trump says that if he doesn't win the election that it'll be rigged is this coming from a man fined $27 million for cheating people and over 2,700 lawsuits for breach of contract. And it seems like they're just being too easy on Trump. I mean, he's a con artist, and he's been impeached, and I think Kamala I think we were all expecting her to really slam Mike Pence last night, and she was very sort of subdued, smart, and she made some really good points. But I think the Democrats...
I think it was... Here's what would have happened, Leslie. Right now, Joe Biden is ahead anywhere from 11 to 16 points all across the country. He's ahead in Texas, for God's sake. And so Kamala Harris's job last night was not to knock it out of the ring. Her job was not to give Mike Pence a black eye. That would have created a whole new dynamic that would be unpredictable. You don't know where that's going to go, particularly with just a few weeks until the election. Her job was to maintain the status quo. And she did a very good job because the status quo is just exploding in their favor. And so I think that what happened was, in particular, if my wife is any indication, and the stuff that I'm seeing online, is that women were seeing Mike Pence just, talking over this woman constantly and whatnot, and they were offended by it, and they got what was going on. And everybody else got that Mike Pence was, that Mike Pence was avoiding the questions and lying to people. So I think it worked out okay. Yeah. I do, but I just wish somebody would call Trump on the fact he's been fined so much money for cheating people when he talks about rigged elections, because he's one of the most dishonest men on the planet. But there you go. Certainly he's the most dishonest president we've ever had. But yeah, spot on, Leslie. And we were all, everybody I think is itching to punch back, but right now I think things are going in the right direction. Yeah. Leslie, thank you for the call. It's great to hear from you. Yep. Marilyn in Sun City, West Arizona. Hey, Marilyn, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, I watched the debate last night with my Republican husband, who I love, sitting right next to me. And when the first question came up about COVID, as soon as it was to Kamala, and as soon as she started to answer, my husband said, "Oh, she's not in." And I said, "Well, just wait. She's giving a bit of a preamble." And she did answer, and I said, "Right there's your answer." When it came to the pre-existing conditions, which as a Canadian really matters to me, it went to Pence first, and he said, "Well, I want to talk about the Supreme Court." And I said to my husband, I wonder if they'll answer about pre-existing conditions. And he never did. In fact, so much so that it was called the Supreme Court. And he said, they put the question on the screen, the question that this is really about the Affordable Care Act, or should be. But I think the Republicans are scared to death that the Democrats, when they get in, are going to pack the court. Yeah. Oh, clearly they are, because this is what what Charles Koch and his little network of buddies have been funding for 40 years. Is let's take over America, and if we can't do it by elections, and I think the 1980 election was a real sobering moment for David Koch, the late David Koch. He only got 1 million votes nationwide, and he poured a lot of money into that. He was running as a libertarian, and he talked about it later on. David Koch did, about how he expected to get a whole lot more than just 1 million votes. So at that point, I think they kind of gave up on the idea of trying to win people, winning hearts and minds, and gaining power through electoral strategies, and started focusing on voter suppression and packing the courts so that they could have more influence on elections. Go ahead. My question to you, Tom, just my one quick question is, and I said this to your call screener, why can't, when we get into power, and I'm sure it'll be a win, why can't we ridiculously pack the court? Like put 50 justices on? Is there a limit to how many you can put on? No, there's not. The limit is what public opinion will follow you with, and this is I talked about this a couple days ago. If Donald Trump is able to stay in office, and if the Supreme Court overturns the Affordable Care Act, overturns and broadly speaking, and overturns Roe v. Wade. And then the administration, starts going forward, and Donald Trump does what he says he's going to do with regard to Social Security and Medicare, cut off the funding for both those programs, and essentially kill them within the 4 years of his administration. The backlash will be so huge. I mean, this is what Herbert Hoover did for 3 years. He had a great crash in 1929, and for the rest of 29, all of 1930, all of 1931, and all of 1932. Herbert Hoover just kind of sat there and twiddled his thumbs. There were a few small efforts that he made, but they were largely inconsequential. And that's why when Franklin Roosevelt ran against him in the election of 32, he just swept the table. I mean, it was just overwhelming. And that was a generational change. We may already be there. I think that we're very close to it in terms of people being horrified by massive inequality in the United States. We now have 80% of all wealth in this country is owned by the top 1%. And the bottom half of America owns less than 2% of all the wealth in this country. That has literally never happened before. We're worse than we were during the Great Depression. And that's a powder keg. I think that a lot of the problems that we have right now are the result of that. Actually, Tucker Carlson was talking about this the other day. In fact, it's This is mind-boggling. Let me just share this with you, Marilyn. This is from Medium.com. This is what Tucker Carlson said. He said, billionaires should not be paying a lower tax rate than you are paying, no matter who they are, no matter who the president is. The main problem with America right now is that a shrinking group of people controls a growing share of our nation's wealth and power. America is lopsided, and it's getting more lopsided every year, and that makes our country unstable. Lopsidedness is why young people seem so hopeless and nihilistic, why so many of them are not starting families. It's why some of them are breaking things in the streets. It's why your grandchildren will almost certainly earn less than you do. And by the way, it's also why Donald Trump got elected 4 years ago. Americans could feel that something was profoundly wrong with the way our country was structured. It seemed clear that the people in charge were in it for themselves. I mean, he's right. It's not, he continued the monologue basically saying, therefore, we need more Republicans, which is kind of crazy. But, Tucker Carlson got it right. And I think that big changes, I think we're on the verge of really, really big change. My hope is, if you look back at these 80-year cycles in American history, the last time we had really, really big change, well, arguably after the assassination of John Kennedy, it took a crisis to produce the Civil Rights Act, the Voting Rights Act, Medicare, Medicaid, all those things in the 4 years after Kennedy was assassinated. Then you go back to the Great Depression, but the Great Depression led to World War II. The great crash of 1856 that was actually started in process, a lot of reforms, that led to the Civil War. The great crash of 1770 led to the American Revolution. So I'm hopeful that this time we don't get a war out of it, Marilyn. That's the thing that concerns me the most, worries me the most, particularly with a guy, experiencing roid rage who's in the White House right now. Nancy Pelosi just a few minutes ago came out and said, tomorrow we are going to be discussing the 25th Amendment. And she's obviously referring to, Trump going on his steroid-pumped rant this morning on whatever television station would take his call. And, but I think that America is waking up, and I think we're seeing that in the polls. And a lot of Americans really don't pay attention to politics until maybe a month before the election, 2 months before the election at the most. And that's what we're seeing, is a whole bunch of Americans who've been listening to music and not paying attention to talk radio or to the news are suddenly starting to pay attention, and they're going, whoa, this is what we've got? Marilyn, thank you for the call. Yes. So, in my opinion, good times are ahead. We just have to navigate through this rather narrow patch of rough water. We'll be right back for Rough Air.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
So, who do you think won the debate last night? I haven't heard from any Mike Pence supporters. Where are the Mike Pence defenders? And welcome back, Jeff in Spokane, Washington. Hey, Jeff, what's on your mind?
Hi, Tom. Thanks for taking my call. What's your opinion on still holding the debate? Just have an empty podium for the MIA POTUS.
It's water under the bridge at this point, Jeff. Originally, first off, Trump went on TV this morning and said, I'm not going to show up. So then the initial response from the Biden campaign, I believe, I read this in a whole bunch of different places, but I haven't seen an actual quote from them, was that's fine. Joe Biden will show up all by himself, and it'll just be a conversation between the moderator and Joe Biden. Then the debate commission came out and said, no, we're not going to do that. And so now Biden is saying that he's going to hold some sort of an event at that time on that night, so that the American people can ask him questions, because the American people deserve to have their questions answered. So Biden's going to do something. Trump is going to have a rally that night. At least that's what he says. We're talking next week, and we don't know how far into his COVID diagnosis he is. Yeah. And now the conversation, what the Biden campaign is saying is, let's do the debate on October 20-something, either 20th or 25th, I forget, but in that week. Let's do it then, because by then Trump will be, virus-free, and we can actually have a safe debate. So I think that's the direction it's going, Jeff.
Good. All right. Thank you.
Yeah. So, Yep, you're welcome. We'll see, right? We'll see, as Mike Dirks used to say. We'll see. Ed, in my old Zen master friend, in Belfair, Washington. Hey, Ed, what's up?
Good morning, Tom, on the West Coast. I wanted to talk to fracking that they were talking about last night, and I read an article in the Rolling Stone a few months back, and it was about the fracking industry in Pennsylvania. And the gist of it, what I remember the most out of it, was these truck drivers are hauling this chemical, this slur, and it's with no hazmat suits, and they're dispersing this stuff or getting rid of it or whatever they're doing with it. But what upset me the most is they're getting this on their clothes. It's eating their clothes. They're getting sores on their bodies. But the bottom line, they're making $16 an hour, no health care, no retirement. It's like the human race has become a throwaway society. They don't care about the working class. It's corporations that are raking in all the money, but throw the human away as soon as they're burnt up.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree, Ed, and in my opinion, her response should have been, fracking is contributing to global warming, fracking is polluting communities, fracking is poisoning the water in some places. That said, until we can make a clean transition to green energy, we're going to have to continue having fracking. But eventually, I would like to see, and it might be 20, 30 years down the road, but eventually I think we would all like to see us get off fossil fuels, including natural gas, and get onto renewable energy. And doing so will create millions of jobs, and it will clean our environment. I think she could have said that, but I get that her mission last night, I mentioned this earlier, in response to another caller. Her mission last night was not to blaze new territory or lay down new talking points or anything like that. Her mission was to maintain the status quo, and I think she did a very good job of that. Ed, thanks for the call. The fracking thing was the thing that troubled me, I think, arguably the most. We'll be right back. Stick around. The hidden history of the war on voting tells how the GOP has been stealing elections for decades and will again this year unless we stop them. So what makes Trump supporters Trump supporters? Good question, right? Well, Psychology Today did a deep dive into a whole bunch of literature on this and a number of studies and concluded that there were 5 characteristics that crossed right across virtually all Trump supporters. I do a deep dive on these on our video over at thomhartmann.com for the supporters of our program today. But here's essentially what it says. Number 1, they are authoritarians, by and large authoritarian followers. They want a strong father figure to make them feel safe. Number 2, social dominance orientation. They believe in a caste system and they think they should be in the top caste. Number 3, prejudice. They view people of other races poorly. Number 4, intergroup contact. Most of them have never experienced significant contact with people of another race or people, deeply different than them. And number 5, relative deprivation. They feel like they've been screwed. They're not sure why. And Trump tells them, oh, it's those brown people. It's all over at thomhartmann.com. And welcome back. Kendall in Three Rivers, Michigan. Hey, Kendall, what's up?
Tom, I just got one request, that you put this question on the air. The president first said that he was not going to reveal the COVID problem because of panic. And I want you to ask, how many people have we lost or died as a result of panic?
Well, I think, Kendall, it's a good question, and it was addressed last night, I believe. Kamala Harris, yeah, I remember. Kamala Harris brought it up. What I would have said, and I don't want to do what I would have said with Kamala Harris. I should stop that right now. But what I said a few weeks ago on this program, when this came out, when Bob Woodward said this is he has the tapes actually of Trump saying this back in February, that he doesn't want to, or January, that he doesn't want to panic the American. He didn't say he didn't want to panic the American people. He said, I don't want to cause a panic. I believe he was talking about a stock market panic. From a billionaire point of view, That's what a panic is. A panic is when the stock market drops. And he's been very successful in keeping the stock market from dropping by having Jerome Powell invent $7 trillion out of thin air and use it to buy stock and corporate bonds. So, you know, I really think that that's the bottom line. But your point is well taken. Thanks a lot for the call, Kendall. Jillian in Poughkeepsie, New York. Hey, Jillian, what's up?
Hi, Tom. Long-time listener, first-time caller. I'm a 20-year-old college student out at Vassar College, and watching the debate last night with a bunch of my friends playing debate bingo, I saw a woman like Harris address a man who feels comfortable interrupting and over-talking, who has done so time after time. And I saw her deal with, react to, and then address it like I have had to in just 20 years. I have had to consistently do the same thing. So while Trump's spin team may try to turn this around for his base, saying, look at how strong this man is to deal with this woman in this way, I saw Pence get his ass handed to him.
Yeah. Jillian, do you think that, broadly speaking, that performance last night hurt the Republican Party with women voters?
I think it did. I think it really did, because this party has branded itself as the party to put down women with their policies that restrict access to reproductive health care and putting down the vote of marginalized communities that are racial and gendered. You could see it in Pence's attitudes toward women in the military from his talk show years past, that this is what the party has branded itself as. And he was defeated last night.
Yeah, there you go. Thank you, Jillian. Your analysis is brilliant. Erlene in Buffalo, Missouri. Hey, Erlene, what's up?
Hi. I was wanting to know if Trump has actually had any virus testing done before he got sick, because he has been very protective about his DNA, and they keep asking questions about when was his last negative test done. And so I'm wondering, has he had a test actually done until he got sick?
Oh, that's interesting, because you're bringing two different issues together here. The E. Jean Carroll, when Trump raped her, or when she alleges Trump raped her in a changing room in a fancy New York department store back in the 80s or 90s, she kept the dress, just like Monica Lewinsky did. She kept the dress with Trump's semen on it, and she's now suing him for slander, and saying that she should be able to get a DNA sample from him to prove that that's his semen on her dress, and he's fighting that, and he's fighting giving his DNA to anybody. At the same time, though, the tests are local to the White House. They've got one of these contraptions from Abbott Laboratories that does the quick test thing. But we had been led to believe, the nation had been led to believe up until a couple days ago, that Trump was getting tested every day, that everybody going in and out of the White House got tested every single day. And that may be true of reporters, or that might be true of casual visitors, but now the White House has come out and said, no, he's not getting tested every day. So we don't know, and because we don't know how long he is into this infection. We don't know if when he debated Vice President Biden, he knew he was infected. Somebody called earlier and said that they thought that Trump was trying to infect Biden. I think that's probably pushing it, but his entire family taking off their masks and saying "screw you" to the scientific and medical community, and to the Cleveland Clinic that was responsible for keeping people safe, and then was he sick then? Was he sick before then? Was he sick when he met with the Gold Star families 2 days after that? Apparently, that's pretty clear. That he met with a bunch of people who have, every single one of them had lost a family member in one of these crazy wars that George W. Bush lied us into, and Trump was apparently sick, and a lot of these people are older, and I mean it's just the whole thing is just so distasteful. Erlene, thank you for the call. I don't think that Trump's refusing to release the COVID test information has anything to do with his lawsuit with E. Jean Carroll. I do think they're separate things. I think that he's refusing to release the information because it would tell us how reckless he was, that he thought he could skate by being one of those asymptomatic people, and just nobody would ever know.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are Gabby.com. Gabby takes the pain out of insurance shopping. More info at Gabby.com/Tom. Bowl and Branch Sheets, crafted for the common good. More info at bowlandbranch.com, code Tom. CB Distillery for sleeping. More info at cbdistillery.com, code Tom. The Clean Phone Pro, phone sanitizer and charger. More info at thenewdealshop.com. ExpressVPN, the VPN that just works. More information at expressvpn.com/Tom. And Teeth, Smarter Pet Dental Health. For more information, teethhealth.com, code Tom.
We say fight back!
Today's book in our book club is The Hidden History of the War on Voting, Who Stole Your Vote and How to Get It Back, by this guy, Thom Hartmann. This is from chapter 1, or from the introduction, actually. In 2016, 6% of Americans who were eligible to vote nominated Donald Trump as the GOP's presidential candidate. It was 8% for Hillary Clinton on the Democratic side. Trump went on to be elected president by 26% of eligible voters. The modern American oligarchs have largely stayed in power using three simple elements: explicit and overt racism, massive disinformation campaigns, and voter suppression. No ideas, no push for better schools, hospitals, airports, roads, or bridges, or reform of our health, energy, or financial systems. No promise of more and better jobs. None of these staples of past presidential campaigns can be found in pretty much any Republican advertising today. Instead, the public Republican message is all about race, or the subset of race, religion. Muslim stands in for brown Arab in GOP speak, and immigration, aka brown people from south of our border, and socialism. Meanwhile, Republican secretaries of state across the nation are vigorously purging voters from the rolls. Over 17 million, more than 10% of America's active voters, in just the 2016-2018 period, according to NBC News. After the After the 5 Republican appointees on the U.S. Supreme Court gutted the Voting Rights Act in 2013, 14 GOP-controlled states moved within a year, some within days, to restrict access to the vote, particularly for communities of color, students, and retired people. In North Carolina, for example, 158 polling places were permanently closed in the 40 counties with the most African-American voters just before the 2016 election, leading to a 16% decline in African-American early voting in that state. An MIT study found that nationwide, Hispanic voters wait 150% longer in line than white voters, and black voters can expect to wait 200% longer in line to vote. In Indiana, then Governor Mike Pence's new rigorous voter ID law caused an 11.5% drop in African-American voting. Students are suing for their right to vote, and retired people who no longer drive but care passionately about their Social Security and Medicare are being turned away at the polls by the hundreds of thousands because their driver's licenses have expired. The obvious failure of 40-plus years of Reaganomics and GOP policies to maintain a functional middle class in America has been a problem for the modern GOP. In 1974, for example, the GOP had outright control of only 7 states. The message, elect us and we'll help the rich people, just didn't generally resonate with American voters. It's the reason why, outside of the fluke elections of 46 and 52, Democrats controlled the House of Representatives outright for 3 generations, from 1933 to 1996, and controlled the Senate for most of that time. Desperate to win the presidency for the GOP in 1968, Richard Nixon went so far as to commit treason by torpedoing a peace deal with President Lyndon Johnson that President Lyndon Johnson had worked out with the North and South Vietnamese. According to Abul Hassan Bani Sadr, then president of Iran, Ronald Reagan did the same thing by cutting a deal with Iran whereby they would hold on to the U.S. embassy hostages until after the 1980 presidential election, torpedoing Jimmy Carter's chances of re-election. But in 2000, the GOP changed tactics. After Reagan was almost busted for his part in Iran-Contra, he testified that he had forgotten about details of the program more than 80 times. His growing Alzheimer's spared him an indictment. They realized that getting busted for treason wasn't worth the risk. They needed a plan B, and it was deliciously simple. If most voters don't like what you're selling, then just don't let them vote. Paul Weyrich promoted this idea back in 1980 when he was campaigning for Reagan after co-founding the Heritage Foundation. And indeed, many Republican luminaries, such as William Rehnquist, who went from serving the GOP by standing in polling places and intimidating Hispanic and Native American voters in the 1960s, to becoming Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, rose up through the ranks by participating in Republican-run voter intimidation schemes. Voter suppression became the foundational go-to tactic for the GOP in 2000. Although the GOP attacked Democratic presidential nominee Al Gore with smear and innuendo, ridiculing him for helping write the legislation that created the modern internet, for example, the main thing that got George W. Bush into the White House was voter suppression. His brother, Florida Governor Jeb Bush, and Bush's Secretary of State, Katherine Harris, threw somewhere between 20,000 and 90,000 African-American voters off the rolls. They were able to get the vote close enough. The 5 Republican appointees to the Supreme Court functionally awarded Bush the presidency. The BBC covered this in 2001 in 2 major investigative reports that were seen all over the world, except on any American media. By 2016, the Republican Party had fine-tuned its voter suppression and intimidation systems to the point that they ran like well-oiled machines in nearly 30 states. Between the 2012 and 2016 presidential elections, for example, Ohio had purged more than 2 million voters from its rolls, the vast majority, more than 2 to 1, in heavily African-American and Hispanic counties. The 5 Republican appointees on the Supreme Court ruled in 2017 that they could keep it up. And other states have since adopted their new tactic of caging voters. The book, The Hidden History of the War on Voting, by me.
with 2fs.com. Also, one of his websites, his Twitter handle is Prof Wolff, Profwolff. And Professor Wolff, let's talk this week about your book, The System is, or The Sickness is the System, When Capitalism Fails to Save It from Pandemics or Itself. How is the form of capitalism that we practice here in the United States itself problematic in the context of trying to provide for the general welfare, the general health?
Well, I think to be blunt, but to be clear, it doesn't work. Capitalism is not a way of managing public health, and we are just now living through a horrific lesson in that truth. And let me briefly explain. We have in America the companies and the factories and the trained personnel who can make masks and gloves and ventilators and hospital beds, everything you need. We have it. We also know that viruses are a part of life. They've been with the human race from day one. We had a terrible one 100 years ago. We really know what they can do. So we know we need to have stockpiled across the United States adequate materials like masks and so on, because we know viruses are transmitted from one mouth to one face to another. We failed to do that. The United States, with 4.5% of the world's people, has 25% of the COVID cases and deaths. What happened? Answer: it wasn't profitable for companies to produce and stockpile masks. There's no secret here, and there's nothing complicated. The reason is simple. If you produce millions of masks, then you have to store them around the country, presumably near centers of population. You have to monitor those masks in those warehouses. Do they stay clean? Do they deteriorate? If they deteriorate, they have to be replaced. If they get unclean, they have to be sterilized, etc., etc. You have to monitor that, and how long do you have to wait? Well, no one knows till the next virus comes. That's a very risky proposition. It's not very profitable when you think of all the expenses and the unknown wait time. So guess what? In a capitalist system where profit is the bottom line, the companies that could have made these things didn't do it, because private profit is not the way you handle the problem of public health. The first demand of any economic system would have to seem to me to be to sustain the health of our people. Otherwise, the rest of it really becomes moot. It's no longer relevant. And this is a system which puts profit first, and in this case, the profit dictated not to produce what the public health demanded. And the government could have stepped in and said, okay, private capitalism really stinks when it comes to public health, so the government, to compensate for the failures of capitalism as an economic system, is going to come in and do it. In other words, the government will pick up the risk by holding this stuff in warehouses. It'll pick up the cost of those warehouses and of maintaining. It would do all of that because private capitalism fails. And we know that the government could do this. That's the worst of it, because the government already does. As my book tries to make clear, it's equally unprofitable to produce a missile or a machine gun or a jet fighter or any of the other basics of our military equipment. And so what happens is private profit would dictate to companies, don't make those things. Don't store them in expensive warehouses, because nobody knows when the next war using them will come down the pike. It's like a virus, you might say. So what does the government do? It comes in and it buys the jet planes and the tanks and the machine guns as fast as they roll off the assembly line, and then at our taxpayer expense, it stores it, it stockpiles it, it maintains it. So we know the government could do it, but the government, beholden to this ideology that private profit is the magic road to everything, didn't step in to do in the medical care field what it does as a normal matter of business in the military field. And I think it's a tragic explanation that capitalism, left to its own profit-driven decision-making, is a disaster for us.
The health-wise, yeah. I just read Zeke Emanuel's book, Which Country Has the Best Healthcare? And he goes through, South Korea, Taiwan, most of the European countries. I mean, he goes through a whole bunch of different countries and examines how their healthcare systems are put together and where they came from. And none of them are rooted in capitalism. None of them. The closest you can get to one that is not a government single-payer system is Switzerland, where everyone is required to buy health insurance, and there are, something like 100 health insurance companies in Switzerland, but they are all also heavily regulated and required to be not-for-profit corporations, so there's no profit motive. So I don't see where capitalism is functioning anywhere in the world in the healthcare sector, in terms of providing health care to people, except in the United States, and it's clearly not functioning here.
Yes, and I think that the underlying message here is one that American ideology, the dominant ideology in this country, refuses to face. We have to understand we live in a society which is fundamentalist in economics. And I mean that in the sense like fundamentalist in religion. It has an idea. It is the idea for them that is the absolute truth. Everything else is to be rejected. And the evangelical notion of economic fundamentalism is that the private sector is always efficient, always best, always the optimum way to go. And this is craziness, especially when it's costing us 210,000, if my numbers are correct, of dead Americans because this government is unable or unwilling to step in when the private profit capitalist system really messes up. And I'm hoping that the lesson will be learned, tragic though it may be to have spent all of these sick people right up to our president to teach the lesson. But that's what the book tries to expose.
Yeah, and it's a marvelous, you lay it out brilliantly. We're talking with Professor Richard Wolff. His latest book, The Sickness is the System, When Capitalism Fails to Save Us from Pandemics or Itself. And Professor Wolff, in the minute or so we have left, what are your thoughts on how we transition from a capitalist, profit-driven healthcare system to one that resembles the rest of the developed world?
I think we have to use the same basic approach that the rest of the developed world did, which is it's clear what the priority is. Public health, and that's not just in terms of health care, but the quality of our food, what we put in our mouths every day, all of that. Those are the bottom lines. Those are the priorities. And we have an economic system that is evaluated and judged on how well it does on that priority task. And by that calculation, we should see this pandemic, the one good thing that might come out of it is, all right, we learned our lesson, let's get a public health system of the sort that puts public health first and subordinates the private profit of a few to what is necessary for the majority.
From your lips to the ears of every American, let us hope. Professor Richard Wolff, the book, The Sickness is the System, When Capitalism Fails to Save Us from Pandemics or Itself, by Professor Richard Wolff. Thank you so much for dropping by again this week. Great talking with you, sir.
Okay, Tom, thank you.
Thank you.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
So, thoughts on the debate last night? What do you think the fly was thinking? What is this underneath me? Nice place to nest? And welcome back. Vladimir in Irvine, California. Hey, Vladimir, what's up?
Hello, Tom. Well, I want to ask you what can be done with one, I would say, critical Biden-Harris campaign is missing to convey to the public, especially those in the middle still undecided, and that's the danger of dictatorship. And you just mentioned it this morning, and actually on your program a couple of times there were kind of things which I'm just putting together, and there is a direct, stunning similarity between what Trump is now and what Hitler was doing in Germany in 1933. And those are two or three things. One is danger, scaring people that there is a danger to the nation, external and internal, to invoke like extreme nationalism, right?
Mm-hmm.
So there is foreign enemies, China, Iran, whatever, caravan, and then internal whatever, socialists, immigrants, now, I know, child trafficker, whatever. And that works. Actually,
right. Yeah. Number one, make people feel like they should be afraid, because when they do, they tend to be more conservative, and they tend to say, "Okay, Big Daddy, take care of me, please." And then Big Daddy turns out to be a dictator.
Not just that, mobilizing them.
I think we might have lost Vladimir. So let's try Steve in Cortez Beach, Colorado. Is that it, Steve?
Colorado, here in the Four Corners. Thanks for taking my call.
Great. So, sure. What's on your mind?
Tom, I was watching the debate last night, of course, and the one with Biden and Trump a couple of weeks ago. As I'm watching these debates, I'm thinking, okay, the is there. That's what's going to make a difference. And I'm wondering why no one in the DNC is really getting it through to the candidates that probably the weakest link in the Republican Party is the Senate, is what we have in the Senate and the leadership of the Senate. Mitch McConnell, who has super low ratings, and the Congress in itself has super ratings, but we need to attack the support that the president gets and has for almost 4 years, and it seems like it's led us into a real strong, if we take advantage. And here in Colorado, we have Cory Gardner running against Hickenlooper. Hickenlooper's ahead. Next door we're dealing with a very positive-looking event coming up with Kelly, who's running against McSally. And I could go up and down the map, of course. But it seems like we have a great opportunity to do it all. And I'm wondering why they're not bringing that up. Thanks, Tom.
Yeah, I agree with you, Steve. And the Senate is a big deal, and I think that we need to be paying a lot of attention to those races. And if you want to have a very focused impact with your $10 donation, consider looking at some of these Senate races, because they are going to define the fate and future to a large extent of the United States going forward. We'll be right back. It's 20 minutes past the hour. Share the Thom Hartmann Program with your friends. We're available on SiriusXM, Free Speech TV, Pacifica, commercial stations nationwide, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, on the Thom Hartmann app, and you can even tell your smart speaker to listen to the Thom Hartmann Program. So there's a new paper out from Breakthrough, the National Center for Climate Restoration in Australia. This is one of these papers that, companies buy these things, governments buy them from these think tanks. This is done by a bunch of military experts. One of these guys actually was also the chairman of the Australian Coal Association and chief executive of the Australian Institute of Company Directors. The bottom line, and I'll just get to it real quick, even for 2 degrees Celsius warming, more than 1 billion people may need to be relocated. And in high-end scenarios, the scale of destruction is beyond our capacity to model, with a high likelihood of human civilization coming to an end. They do offer a solution. It's a radical Marshall-style program. You can check out the entire thing on our special, kind of members-only, or for our supporters video over at thomhartmann.com. You can check it out, get the whole thing. So check it out. Back to your thoughts on, what's going on here. I mean, this is just nuts. Buck in Johnson Creek, Wisconsin. Hey, Buck, what's up?
I wish in the debate last night when Mike Pence claimed about how great the economy was under Republicans and how stagnant it is under Obama, they would actually take the gross domestic product, subtract the inflation, CPI, and you would find that in the last 3 years of Obama, the economy grew at 1.3%, and under the first 3 years of Trump, it grew at 0.5%. So Obama's economy actually grew 2.7 times faster than Trump's, And if you look at job creation, Obama created over 7,600,000 jobs in the last 3 years, and Trump created 6,400,000 using CES numbers. So, Republicans seem to own how great the economy is, but in reality, it's just, fake news that I wish the Democrats would actually stand up and use some actual numbers and say, hey, it's not real.
Yeah, and it seems that it's always Republicans who are in charge when there's a big crash. You had, the first major crash in 1929. You had Herbert Hoover. He's a Republican. The second largest crash in 1987, behind the one in 1929, was when Ronald Reagan was president, and he left an economy that was beginning to skew toward oligarchy. Then you get a major crash under George W. Bush, and now we've got a giant crash under Donald Trump. And yeah, he's keeping the stock market inflated so his rich buddies don't lose a pile of money. But, that's about it. So, yes, I am totally with you, Buck.
So
go ahead.
Can I share a quick solution to global warming?
Sure.
To make it about money, that get the Congressional Budget Office to come up with actual costs for renewable energy and fossil fuels, and have climate deniers have to argue that they want to pay more for their electricity as we trash this planet, and then maybe we'd start investing in renewable energy, and we can stop arguing about science.
Yeah, and that math has been done. It was 3 or 4 years ago that we hit the point where solar and wind were less expensive than producing power by coal, nuclear, or oil. Natural gas is still a little cheaper, but that's, in my opinion, because it's very, very heavily subsidized, and because fracking produces this explosion of gas over the short term, but over the long term, fracking is no solution. Most fracked wells run dry within a decade or so. So, we've got we're there. Buck, thank you for that. Charles in Portland. Hey, Charles, what's up?
Hey, Tom, how's it going? I wanted to reply about the debates last night. I was yelling through the whole thing, like I'm sure most other people, but the answers that Kamala was given on will you pack the court, I thought that was a missed opportunity. They, instead of trying to weasel, who knows what we'll do, and trying to play coy, they could have given an answer that made sense. They could have said, you know what, if the court is reflective of the American people, then there's no need to pack it. But if it's reflecting some radical subset of the American people, then we need to change it. And we would look at that. And it's not changing the rules. That's the way the court is set up. We've had 150 years of 9 judges. Maybe we should have been at 12 judges 50 years ago, or 6 judges, or whatever an appropriate number is that actually gives the court the balance, the reflecting of the American people. And they could have said, we're not some power-hungry Democrat party that's out to inflict our will, like if we were trying to rush through a Supreme Court justice now. But we are a party that reflects what the American people need, their interests, and we want to make sure that all of our governmental agencies, court, legislature, and executive reflect that priority. That's an answer that could have excited people that would have been devastating to Pence and to Trump.
I agree, Charles, in the abstract, and by the way, it's the Democratic Party, but I know you know that.
Yeah.
We're starting to pick up these ticks, right? It's not a healthy thing. I completely agree with you in principle, but here's the thing. Kamala Harris last night, number one, she can't go off script from Joe Biden. She's the number 2 person. This is not the presidential debate, it's the vice presidential debate. So everything has to be in the frame of what would Joe Biden do, what would Donald Trump do. That all of the arguments. And Joe Biden has not spoken about packing the court one way or the other, number one. And number 2, I think her main job last night was not to own Mike Pence or even win the debate. Her main job was to keep the current status quo, because the current status quo is every week that goes by, Trump loses by another 1 or 2%. It's just it's turning into a landslide, an avalanche against not just Trump, but Republicans all over the country. And if she was to say anything that could be misinterpreted, misconstrued, taken out of context, twisted around, or thrown into the ether as oh my God about the court, or frankly anything else, it would have disrupted that momentum that the Biden campaign has right now, in which they are just kicking Donald Trump's butt all the way around the block. So I agree completely with your perspective, Charles. And if this was a presidential debate, I think that's how it should have been handled. But right now, her job was to not make news. Her job was to basically hold that space, and I think she did a good job of that. Charles, I got to run. Thanks a lot for the call.
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Defying Hitler by Sebastian Haffner, a memoir. This is from chapter 17, about a little more than a third of the way into the book. At first, the revolution only gave the impression of being an historical event like any other, a matter for the press that might just possibly have some effect on the public mood. The Nazis celebrate January 30th as their day of revolution. They are wrong. There was no revolution on January 30th, 1933, just a change of government. Hitler became chancellor, by no means the Führer of the Nazi regime. The cabinet contained only 2 Nazis apart from him. He swore an oath of allegiance to the Weimar Constitution. The general opinion was that it was not the Nazis who had won, but the bourgeois parties of the right, who had captured, in quotes, the Nazis and held all the key positions in the government. In constitutional terms, events had taken a much more conventional, unrevolutionary course than most of what had happened during the previous 6 months. Outwardly also, the day had no revolutionary aspects, unless one considers a Nazi torchlight procession through Wilhelmstrasse or a minor gunfight in the suburbs that night as signs of a revolution. For most of us outsiders, the experience of January 30th, 1933 was that of reading the papers and the emotions we felt while we were doing so. The morning headline was, "Hitler called to president." That produced a certain nervous, impotent irritation. Hitler had been called to the president in August and November. He had been offered the vice-chancellorship and then the chancellorship. Both times he had set impossible conditions, and both times there had been solemn declarations, "Never again." Each time, "never again" had lasted exactly 3 months. Hitler's opponents in Germany at that time suffered from a compulsive urge to offer him everything he wanted, indefatigably, and at an even cheaper price. Indeed, to press it upon him. It's the same now with his opponents outside Germany. Again and again, this appeasement was formally renounced, and again it gaily reappeared at the crucial moment. Just so today. Then, as now, one's only hope was Hitler's own unreasonableness. Would it not sooner or later exhaust the patience of his opponents? Then, as now, it became apparent that their patience knew no bounds. At midday, the headline said, "Hitler makes impossible demands." We nodded, half reassured. It was only too credible. It would have gone against his nature to ask for less than too much. Perhaps the cup had once more passed from us. Hitler, the last defense against Hitler. At about 5 o'clock, the evening papers arrived. Cabinet of National Unity formed Hitler Reichschancellor. I don't know what the general reaction was. For about a minute, mine was completely correct. Icy horror. Certainly this had been a possibility for a long time. You had to reckon with it. Nevertheless, it was so bizarre, so incredible to read it now in black and white. Hitler, Reichschancellor. For a moment, I physically sensed the man's odor of blood and filth, the nauseating approach of a man-eating animal, its foul, sharp claws in my face. Then I shook the sensation off, tried to smile, started to consider, and found many reasons for reassurance. That evening, I discussed the prospects of the new government with my father. We agreed it had a good chance of doing a lot of damage, but not much chance of surviving very long. A deeply reactionary government with Hitler as its mouthpiece. Apart from this, it did not really differ much from the 2 governments that had succeeded Brüning's. Even with the Nazis, it would not have a majority in the Reichstag. Of course, that could always be dissolved, but the government had a clear majority of the population against it, in particular the working class, which would probably go communist now that the Social Democrats had completely discredited themselves. One could prohibit the communists, but that would only make them more dangerous. In the meantime, the government would be likely to implement reactionary social and cultural measures with some anti-Semitic additions to please Hitler. That would not attract any of its opponents to its side. Foreign policy would probably be a matter of banging the table. There might be an attempt to rearm. That would automatically add the outside world to the 60% of the home population who were against the Hitler government. Besides, who were the people who had suddenly started voting Nazi in the last 3 years? Misguided ignoramuses, for the most part, victims of propaganda, a fluctuating mass that would fall apart at the first disappointment. No, all things considered, this government was not a cause for alarm. The only question was what would come after it. It was possible that they would drive the country to civil war. The communists were capable of going on the attack before a prohibition against them came into force. The next day, this turned out to be the general opinion of the intelligent press. It is curious how plausible an argument it is, even today, when we know what came next. How could things turn out so completely different? Perhaps it was just because we were all so certain that they could not do so, and relied on that with far too much confidence. So we neglected to consider that it might, if worse came to worse, be necessary to prevent the disaster from happening. Through the whole of February 1933, everything that happened remained a matter for the press. In other words, it took place in an arena that would lose all reality for 99% of the population the moment there were no newspapers. Admittedly, enough occurred in that arena. The Reichstag was dissolved. Then, in a flagrant breach of the Constitution, Hindenburg also dissolved the Prussian regional parliament. There were fast and furious changes of personnel in the civil service. The book defined Hitler.
Our video for our supporters of our program this week that's available over at ThomHartmann.com talks about the radical idea of universal health care. What countries in the world might actually have universal health care? Something that, according to Republicans, we're just not smart enough or competent enough or whatever. It's too radical an idea, you know. They include Australia, Austria, Belgium, Canada, Chile, Czech Republic, Denmark, Finland, France, Germany, Greece, Hungary, Iceland, Israel, Italy, Japan, the Netherlands, New Zealand, Norway, Poland, Portugal, South Korea, Spain, Sweden, Switzerland, Turkey, and the United Kingdom. So why can't we do it here? Well, because you've got an entire political party, the Republican Party, and a few Democrats who are wholly owned subsidiaries of the health insurance industry. And you got a health insurance industry that's paying its CEOs millions, in one case, United Healthcare, billions, or billion. And so, gridlock. Anyhow, it's over at ThomHartmann.com. Welcome back. Just got a press release in the mail. Mike Pence's fly requests all your thoughts and prayers while he gets tested today. No, seriously, I just got that in email. It's amazing. Another thing that I think is interesting, Laura Flanders was writing about this over on Common Dreams yesterday, actually, that back when AIDS was around, and there was all this hysteria, oh my God, the gay people, and oh my God, you know, AIDS, and et cetera. 32 states basically criminalized living with HIV. If you put another person in a position where they may get it from you, even unintentionally, even with no threat, even with no disease being transmitted. And 13 states provide stiff penalties for people who communicate other contagious diseases, including hepatitis and stuff like that. And in New Jersey, where Donald Trump exposed apparently 100 people at his fundraiser to the coronavirus, after he knew that he was at risk because Hope Hicks had already tested positive for sure, and we believe he had tested positive. We just don't know because he won't tell us. But in New Jersey, the law, one of these laws that was passed, exposing a person to HIV in New Jersey is punishable by up to 5 years in prison and a $15,000 fine. And in Florida, which is what Trump is claiming as his residence now, since there's no income tax down there, there are half a dozen different laws on the books in Florida that criminalize transmitting HIV. 266 people in Florida have been convicted of that crime, of transmitting a transmissible disease to another person, specifically HIV. Or, HIV, the human, so immunodeficiency virus. So here we are. I mean, is it time to put Donald Trump in jail? Is that why he is refusing to release his test results, so that we won't know when he committed these acts that are actually criminal in New Jersey, which is the most recent, mass infection event that he was involved with? We just don't know. Jim in Arlington Heights, Illinois. Hey, Jim, what's up?
Well, I was thinking about something that I saw yesterday when they gave her the question about the age of the presidents and what she thought about it. And my attitude, what if she says that, well, look at it, that's succession. Look what's going on right now. Other presidents, when they became sick, Reagan did it, Carter did it, Bush did it, they temporarily turned over the presidency to their number one man, their number two man, the vice president, you.
Right.
Now, what's going on now? We have a president that we know has taken drugs that are experimental. We don't know how they affect them, and as far as I'm concerned, why is it that you're not president right now? He should have temporarily turned it over to you, went to isolation for the good of the country. Now, there's two reasons why he didn't do it. One, he has an ego so big, which we know he does, that he won't do that for the country. Or two, he has any confidence in you taking over. Which one is it?
Yeah. I think it's all of the above, Jim.
I know that.
And he certainly should have turned this over to Pence, particularly when he was put on steroids. And this is why Nancy Pelosi this morning said that tomorrow they're going to be talking about the 25th Amendment. Now, the 25th Amendment has to be initiated by the vice president, and it then falls to the majority of the cabinet members. But say that again?
In the cabinet, too, sir. I'm sorry. The
cabinet. Right, yeah, the cabinet. Right, but the process itself has to be initiated by the vice president. And, he should be doing this. But, Trump has clearly said, I don't know if he's threatened Pence or if he's promised him, vast rewards if he stays with him or what. It's just, I just don't know. But, Jim, thank you. Your point is well taken. Angela in New York City. Hey, Angela, what's up?
Hey, Tom, how are you? First off, thoughts and prayers for the fly. Just want to make sure he's okay. I just wanted to talk about the debate last night and how I found myself screaming at the TV a lot because I feel like Kamala was holding back. I could feel her frustration. I mean, I think that maybe the way she was prepared for this was along the lines of, maintain the status quo and in terms of don't be confrontational too confrontational. I mean, in other words, she was kind of trying to appeal to the American people rather than, given to Pence's craziness. And I think that was the same tactic that was used last week with Trump. Here's the thing, though. I mean, as a woman, we've all been in that situation where we've had a man talk over us and not listen to us. And I felt he really disrespected her and had no problem disrespecting her. And it was just, there were so many different points, especially when they talked about packing the court, where she could have said, well, what have you guys been doing for the past, 4 years? I mean, that's all you've been doing. And she didn't really say that. And I felt the same way after the disaster last week. I felt like, Donald Trump is like, every woman knows that kind of guy. I mean, he's just, that kind of guy. But last night especially, I really felt like Kamala could have just, really put the facts out there and really just kind of, in other words, I was expecting more. And instead, what I felt afterwards was people were talking more about the fly, which, was hilarious. But then they were actually talking about what happened, and everybody was claiming, and some people were claiming Pence was the winner, and some people were claiming she was the winner. I just feel like she was being held back. And as a woman, I know what that feels like, and I really, really, really am angry about it. And I'm exhausted by this administration. And that's all I have to say.
Well, I think we're all exhausted by it, Angela. And earlier in the program, I just made a kind of offhand comment that I thought the fly was going to be the most consequential thing out of the evening. I didn't mean it seriously, but somebody on Twitter took me to task and said, no, the most consequential thing was that Pence was disrespecting a woman. I agree with that. I think that was the most consequential thing of the night. I think it's going to have the largest electoral effect because women vote in large numbers in this country.
I hope so. I hope that women do, because I've been actually registering voters as part of my job, and I'm having some difficulty with some women, just actually wanting to register and wanting to vote, particularly women of color. There's some issues here, and there's also a lot of voter suppression. But I hope that after last night that women will look at this administration and what it's going to do to us and what's going to happen if this woman makes it onto the Supreme Court. I honestly, at this point, I just don't know. I'm holding my breath until Election Day, and I really don't know what's going to happen afterwards. And I'm hoping for the best, but at the same time, I don't know. I'm preparing for the worst.
I think I agree. I think we're all holding our breath until January 20th. Angela, thank you. Thank you for a thoughtful comment. Catherine in Baltimore, Maryland. Hey, Catherine, your thoughts?
Hi, Tom. I am fairly concerned about the Affordable Care Act decision because, remember, Elena Kagan has to recuse because she helped work on the ACA during the Obama administration, which means we only have two liberal justices to deal with that. And the other thing I'm concerned about, if Trump starts screaming about, mail-in voter fraud or whatever and tries to take this to the Supreme Court, we need to remember that Roberts and Kavanaugh are the ones who conspired. They were Bush lawyers who conspired to make this Brooks Brothers riot down in Miami in the Bush-Gore thing about the hanging chads and whatever. So do you think that they should have to recuse themselves if there's, a case that goes to them about the election?
Yes. and with regard to recusal, the Supreme Court is not bound by the Federal Code of Judicial Ethics that other federal courts are. Right. And so it's up to Elena Kagan whether she's going to recuse herself or not. It's up to both.
Roberts
actually,
and Kavanaugh.
Well, I was thinking, John Roberts. Yes, John Roberts and Brett Kavanaugh were both, I believe, Roberts was down in Florida. I believe Kavanaugh was. Both of them have talked about, or, it's on their resumes, essentially, that they worked on that case. So, whether they're going to recuse themselves or not, and whether we're going to see a repeat of 2000 or not, I don't know. This kind of falls into the category of we're all holding our breath to see what happens on January 20th. That's going to be the day. I mean, that's when the term expires. Yeah. Catherine, thank you for the call. No quick or easy answers here. We just all need to stay involved and get as many people out to vote as possible.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
45 minutes past the hour. Back with your calls in just a moment. And welcome back. Let's see here. Sharon in San Marcos, California. Hey, Sharon, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. We literally have Trump on steroids right now, and he's feeling great. What's going to happen? What's going to happen when he bullies his doctors into keeping him on steroids? And he will. He will. He's feeling great. He has no reason to stop the therapy. He's going to insist that they continue. And we've seen that he can bully his doctors into doing and saying just about anything. So you can bet, I'd put money on him staying on steroids until his heart gives out or whatever. What do you think?
I've had steroids twice. Once was after that surgery that I mentioned a while ago, and once was I got an injection in my shoulder to try to deal with something, and the doctor did it wrong, and it went systemic, and I had a terrible reaction to it. But what was explained to me about this, and also I got a steroid shot in my spine before I had spinal surgery. What was explained to me is that if you stay on steroids for more than a few weeks, that your connective tissue starts breaking down. Now, I don't know if that was local to the shoulder and back where I got the injections, or systemic, but I believe that I heard that it'll also break down your kidneys. But that's really a question for a doc. I mean, I'm just another patient here. But I don't think it would be malpractice.
Yeah, but they've had malpractice already just in all the lies they've told.
Yeah, it's a good point. And then there's the possibility of psychosis as a consequence of taking steroids for a long period of time.
I wouldn't put it past him to insist on it. He's feeling great. I mean, how many times now has he tweeted, he's feeling great? Once that starts wearing off, he's going to realize that he's not feeling great anymore, and he's going to want them to put him back on.
Well, I'm wondering if yesterday he didn't get any, and he demanded some this morning, and he got a shot this morning, at 8 o'clock in the morning, and that's why he suddenly started calling TV shows, because calling into Fox Business channel is not something that you schedule in advance, right? I mean, this had to be spur of the moment. He just called up and said, "Hey, put me on the air. Let's talk." Which to me is a flag that he's having a manic episode. I mean, my understanding of steroids is that basically they replicate something like manic depressive, bipolar syndrome or whatever it's called, where you go up and then you go down. And what concerns me, I'm very concerned about the decisions he's making, the things he's saying, and the things he might be doing while he's high. I'm even more concerned about what the decisions he's going to make and how he's going to respond to people when he's crashing, because that's when he could start a war with Iran. Excuse me. That's when he could, he could just do the potential for the president of the United States to do harm is vast. I mean, the power that he has is extraordinary.
How long does this steroid treatment last for COVID? Do you know?
I don't know.
But it has to eventually, it's supposed to end, but he's not going to let it end. You watch. I'll bet on it.
Yeah. Well, we'll see. Sharon, I can't argue with you on that. I think you may well be right that he's going to try to. The question is, will his doctors let him? And then what happens when he wears, when they wear off? Sharon, thanks for the call. We'll be right back. It's coming up on 10 minutes before the hour. On the Science Revolution this week, Donald Trump has tested positive for COVID-19. What does that mean for America? Dr. Michael Mann is here on Greenland and how it's set to lose more ice than in the past 12,000 years. This is a climate disaster. Gene Ross from National Nurses United drops by about the widespread failure to track and report data on COVID-19 deaths, testing, and infections. Kevin Camps from Beyond Nuclear joins me from New Mexico, begetting a radioactive waste dump. And in Geeky Science, an awe walk, AWE, an awe walk may do wonders for all of us right now. Tune into the Science Revolution wherever fine podcasts are available. Welcome back. 10 minutes before the hour. Bill in Clifton, New Jersey. Hey, Bill, what's on your mind?
Yeah, hey. I've been wondering about the process for adding justice to the court. I assumed that you needed 2/3 majority in both houses at least, or is it treated sort of like as house cleaning kind of a thing?
There's no stipulation in the Constitution for anything other than the legislature Congress can regulate the court. It's Article 3, Section 2. You can read it. It's very short. It's very straightforward. Mm-hmm. And so Congress then makes their own rules, and those rules get recertified every 2 years when a new Congress comes in. And so things like the filibuster, which requires right now 60 votes. There was a time when it required 66 votes, or a 2/3 majority anyway. But that's up to the body itself. So if the Democrats come in and take the Senate, and if they blow up the filibuster, which there's a broad, I think, consensus among Democrats needs to be done, then they can pass anything with a simple majority, including expanding the Supreme Court. It simply requires that both the House and the Senate pass it with a majority vote and that it be signed by the president. That's all. It's just a simple piece of legislation changing the number of people on the court. It's been done, 5 or 6 or 7 times since the founding of the Republic.
It sounds too easy for such a difficult thing. Plus, they should put a rule in the Senate that you need a 60-vote majority for Supreme Court justices. That's my feeling.
Well, we had that right up until Mitch McConnell blew it up. There was a filibuster provision for Supreme Court justices, and in order to get Brett Kavanaugh in, Mitch McConnell had the Senate change its own rules. And so it's simple majority now for Supreme Court people. But again, those are Senate rules. Those are not constitutional requirements. But it has happened multiple times. I mean, when Abe Lincoln was assassinated and Andrew Johnson became president, Lincoln was an anti-slavery Republican. Andrew Johnson was a pro-slavery, slave-owning Democrat. And Johnson and there was an opening on the Supreme Court. And the Republicans controlled the House and Senate at that time because they had just won the Civil War, and half the southern states, which were the Democratic bastion, literally did not have representation in Congress. And so Congress got together and said, we're going to reduce the size of the Supreme Court down to, as I recall, it was from 10 down to 7. I could be wrong on that. But they reduced it by 2 or 3. In order to prevent Andrew Johnson from appointing anybody to the Supreme Court. And then after Johnson left his term of office in, 1868, I think, and Ulysses S. Grant came in and became president, a good, safe Republican, then Congress met again and raised it back up to 9. I think it went from 10 to 7 to 9 during that period of time. There was a similar thing that happened in the election of 1800. Thomas Jefferson beat John Adams in November of 1800, but he didn't take office until March of 1801. And so during that 5-month period, John Adams passed a law reducing the number of members of the Supreme Court by 1 so that the incoming President Jefferson wouldn't be able to appoint anybody. Jefferson came in along with his Democratic Republicans, which is now what we call the Democratic Party, and passed another law that increased the size of the Supreme Court by 2. So it's not like it hasn't happened before. It's just the last time it happened was when Ulysses Grant did it right after Andrew Johnson left. But it's pretty straightforward process. I got to run, Bill. Thanks for the call. Daniel in Fort Lauderdale. Hey, Daniel, what's up?
Yeah, I just wanted to give you a call. I got a little fired up this morning. I listened to Sirius XM all day in the background of my office, and I jumped between channels, basically POTUS, Urban View, and this channel here. But this morning, listening to POTUS and Smerconius' show, nothing against Smerconius, great show, very fair. But there was a trend of white women, if you will, I can only assume they were white women, calling in, basically saying that they were uncomfortable with Kamala's body language, and that's why they're not going to vote for Biden. They just don't feel comfortable with a passionate, and that was what got me, a passionate woman like that being in charge. And it's like, this isn't about her passion or her body language. They're uncomfortable.
Daniel, that's all code for the color of her skin.
You got that right. And as somebody who, and just to get this out there to everybody listening, I worked my way out of corporate America because of that kind of stuff. I was a C-level executive for a few large companies, and we'd be in board meetings where John Smith is slamming the desk and getting his point across, and if I raise my voice or get assertive, it's deemed as being too passionate. And it just goes back to the whole Yeah, because I'm black. Black people are too passionate, right? White people just got a little bit upset that day.
Yeah.
So it just goes back to that whole thing of, you got to listen, and as the great Joe Madison says, you have to listen with your third ear. These people aren't uncomfortable with her body language. they're uncomfortable with a minority holding a position of power. And in 2020, minority, gay, lesbian, whatever, can we get past that? And where did moderation go? Right? If Pence ends up being the president because of poor choices by Trump, we're going to have an extreme right-leaning Christian view person in charge. That should fear you more than a moderate person being in office.
Yeah, I'm with you. Daniel, thank you. Spot on. You hit the nail on the head, and pick your metaphor of choice, but spot on. We'll be right back right after this. We'll continue our conversation. And do you think anybody is going to try to charge Trump with a crime in New Jersey for spreading a disease?
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are Gabby.com. Gabby takes the pain out of insurance shopping. More info at Gabby.com/Tom. Boll and Branch Sheets, crafted for the common good. More info at bollandbranch.com, code Tom. CB Distillery for sleeping. More info at cbdistillery.com, code Tom. The Clean Phone Pro, phone sanitizer and charger. More info at thenewdealshop.com. ExpressVPN, the VPN that just works. More information at expressvpn.com/Tom. And Teeth, Smarter Pet Dental Health. For more information, teethhealth.com, code Tom.
We say fight back!
Today's book in our book club is The Hidden History of the War on Voting, Who Stole Your Vote and How to Get It Back, by this guy, Thom Hartmann. This is from chapter 1, or from the introduction, actually. In 2016, 6% of Americans who were eligible to vote nominated Donald Trump as the GOP's presidential candidate. It was 8% for Hillary Clinton on the Democratic side. Trump went on to be elected president by 26% of eligible voters. The modern American oligarchs have largely stayed in power using three simple elements: explicit and overt racism, massive disinformation campaigns, and voter suppression. No ideas, no push for better schools, hospitals, airports, roads, or bridges, or reform of our health, energy, or financial systems. No promise of more and better jobs. None of these staples of past presidential campaigns can be found in pretty much any Republican advertising today. Instead, the public Republican message is all about race, or the subset of race, religion. Muslim stands in for brown Arab in GOP speak, and immigration, aka brown people from south of our border, and socialism. Meanwhile, Republican secretaries of state across the nation are vigorously purging voters from the rolls. Over 17 million, more than 10% of America's active voters, in just the 2016-2018 period, according to NBC News. After the After the 5 Republican appointees on the U.S. Supreme Court gutted the Voting Rights Act in 2013, 14 GOP-controlled states moved within a year, some within days, to restrict access to the vote, particularly for communities of color, students, and retired people. In North Carolina, for example, 158 polling places were permanently closed in the 40 counties with the most African-American voters just before the 2016 election, leading to a 16% decline in African-American early voting in that state. An MIT study found that nationwide, Hispanic voters wait 150% longer in line than white voters, and black voters can expect to wait 200% longer in line to vote. In Indiana, then Governor Mike Pence's new rigorous voter ID law caused an 11.5% drop in African American voting. Students are suing for their right to vote, and retired people who no longer drive but care passionately about their Social Security and Medicare are being turned away at the polls by the hundreds of thousands because their driver's licenses have expired. The obvious failure of 40-plus years of Reaganomics and GOP policies to maintain a functional middle class in America has been a problem for the modern GOP. In 1974, for example, the GOP had outright control of only 7 states. The message, elect us and we'll help the rich people, just didn't generally resonate with American voters. It's the reason why, outside of the fluke elections of 46 and 52, Democrats controlled the House of Representatives outright for 3 generations, from 1933 to 1996, and controlled the Senate for most of that time. Desperate to win the presidency for the GOP in 1968, Richard Nixon went so far as to commit treason by torpedoing a peace deal with President Lyndon Johnson that President Lyndon Johnson had worked out with the North and South Vietnamese. According to Abul Hassan Bani Sadr, then president of Iran, Ronald Reagan did the same thing by cutting a deal with Iran whereby they would hold on to the U.S. embassy hostages until after the 1980 presidential election, torpedoing Jimmy Carter's chances of re-election. But in 2000, the GOP changed tactics. After Reagan was almost busted for his part in Iran-Contra, he testified that he had forgotten about details of the program more than 80 times. His growing Alzheimer's spared him an indictment. They realized that getting busted for treason wasn't worth the risk. They needed a plan B, and it was deliciously simple. If most voters don't like what you're selling, then just don't let them vote. Paul Weyrich promoted this idea back in 1980 when he was campaigning for Reagan after co-founding the Heritage Foundation. And indeed, many Republican luminaries, such as William Rehnquist, who went from serving the GOP by standing in polling places and intimidating Hispanic and Native American voters in the 1960s, to becoming Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, rose up through the ranks by participating in Republican-run voter intimidation schemes. Voter suppression became the foundational go-to tactic for the GOP in 2000. Although the GOP attacked Democratic presidential nominee Al Gore with smear and innuendo, ridiculing him for helping write the legislation that created the modern internet, for example, the main thing that got George W. Bush into the White House was voter suppression. His brother, Florida Governor Jeb Bush, and Bush's Secretary of State, Katherine Harris, threw somewhere between 20,000 and 90,000 African-American voters off the rolls. They were able to get the vote close enough. The 5 Republican appointees to the Supreme Court functionally awarded Bush the presidency. The BBC covered this in 2001 in 2 major investigative reports that were seen all over the world, except on any American media. By 2016, the Republican Party had fine-tuned its voter suppression and intimidation systems to the point that they ran like well-oiled machines in nearly 30 states. Between the 2012 and 2016 presidential elections, for example, Ohio had purged more than 2 million voters from its rolls, the vast majority, more than 2 to 1, in heavily African-American and Hispanic counties. The 5 Republican appointees on the Supreme Court ruled in 2017 that they could keep it up, and other states have since adopted their new tactic of caging voters. The book, The Hidden History of the War on Voting, by me.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
So the Detroit News is publishing the story that this plot put together by these right-wing militia cranks in Michigan was planning on kidnapping Governor Whitmer and taking over the government of Michigan or something like that. I mean, it's very bizarre, and yet it's not. And I'm wondering to what extent this ties back to Donald Trump's April 17th tweet, "Liberate Michigan." Remember that? Liberate Michigan. And, you know, we all know the militias and the Nazis and the racists follow Donald Trump obsessively, compulsively. And here we are. This is a cancer in the United States. This is a cancer that we have had in this country for a long, long time. Domestic terrorism that is fundamentally based in racism and well, to some extent even sexism, misogyny, but in particular on racism. We had the Klan back in the 19th century and through the 20th century. And now we've got, you know, the Klan has been reinvented under a variety of names as these right-wing militia groups. And the idea is, you know, as Mike Lee said, we're not a democracy, we're a republic. You know, we're run by a small group of people. We're actually a representative republic, which is one of the definitions of a democracy, but anyway, this is extraordinarily destructive stuff. This is very, very dangerous stuff. And you go back, you look at what Tim McVeigh did when he blew up the Oklahoma City federal building. In my humble opinion, I mean, you know, just 2 years before that, you had Waco with David Koresh, and I believe it was a year before that, you had Randy Weaver getting killed by federal officers. Koresh and Weaver were both basically, you know, right-wing, hardcore, white supremacist, armed insurrectionists. And the book that these people were reading back then, the book that actually animated Tim McVeigh, according to Tim McVeigh, was a book called The Turner Diaries. And the Turner Diaries is a novel. It's a rather poorly written novel. It's kind of on par with Ayn Rand's writing. You know, it's juvenile. It's the kind of stuff that you would expect coming out of a high school student or, you know, a first attempt by a young person. Its worldview is so simplistic. But basically, in the Turner Diaries, you've got this story of a white guy, a group of white people who are, well, actually, they're trying to rebel against the government. Where it starts is they blow up a federal building. And I believe it was in Oklahoma City. It's been 20 years since I read the book. But it might have been someplace else, might have been in the Midwest. But they blow up a federal building, and in response to that, the administration, and this was not a partisan book, it's not Democrats and Republicans, it's just, you know, like Americans, you know, the white nationalists versus America. And in response to this group, this militia group blowing up this federal building, the president and the federal government pass laws banning all guns and start taking guns away from people. And as a result of that, the white militias get activated. They rise up. The guys who have got, you know, 10, 15 assault weapons in their basement and 1,000 rounds of ammunition, they rise up, they go out in the streets, and they start killing people. A second civil war erupts. And, you know, half the book is devoted to that. And then at the end of the book, the white guy militia members, the guys with the assault weapons and all the bullets, have succeeded in killing almost all of the people of color in this country. African Americans, Hispanics, Jews, that, you know, he's throwing them into that category in Turner Diaries. And at the very end, you know, the strong, proud white men are standing there holding their guns and saying, "We have taken back our country." So that was the Turner Diaries. Then, you know, a few decades after that, there was this book that came out of France. It was called Camp of the Saints, which is a reference to, that's a biblical reference, but it's basically the last guys standing. We're the ones who are holding the space. And it's another racist screed. I have a copy of it around here someplace. I haven't read it all, cover to cover like I did Turner Diaries, but I've read good chunks of it. And most of it is describing people of color in extraordinary terms. I mean, extraordinarily filthy terms. And that's one of the words that appears in the book over and over and over. Filthy and infested and just these descriptive phrases that are very, very similar to the way that Adolf Hitler and the Nazis in the 1930s referred to gypsies and Jews and gay people and other minorities in general, but particularly the gypsies and the Jews. It's how they were described by Hitler, as basically animals, as cockroaches, as subhuman. And it's about a race war. And these two books are like the Bibles of this movement. Now, Gretchen Whitmer is not black, but she's a woman, and her lieutenant governor, Garland Gilchrist, is black. And so, you can see where a group that has just steeped itself in this white supremacist, racist mythology would be thinking, these are the people we need to take down. We can't have women in leadership. That's, one of the fundamental tenets of the white supremacist worldview. Because it's not just a white supremacist worldview. It's a white male supremacist worldview. It's like this cult in the Catholic Church that Amy Coney Barrett is a member of, where the women are referred to as handmaids and the men are referred to as the heads of the family. Following the teachings of Paul from 2,000 years ago. I mean, we're taking our cues from ancient Bronze Age sky god religions that defined our tribe. In this case, originally it was the Hebrews, right? Defining, but it's every religion's stories basically are the stories of their own people. And the assumption is always that their people are the people who are chosen by God. And that kind of idea, and you'll find this in, literally every religion, every culture. The creation stories are, like in Genesis, in the creation story, Adam and Eve were the first people, right? No. They married their son off to a woman from the town down the street. They weren't the first people. They were simply the first, in this context, the first biblical people, let's say, or the first Jewish people. So creation stories are always like this. So now we've got this new creation story, essentially, this new arch story that has been subscribed to by literally millions of white American men. And it's going viral. And now QAnon is the latest incarnation of this. So we go from Turner Diaries to Camp of the Saints to QAnon. And at every stage, it gets more bizarre. And that's where we are right now. And that's a dangerous space.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Anyhow, I'll toss it open to your thoughts on all this right after this break. Stick around. 15 minutes past the hour. And welcome back. Donovan in Redway, California. Hey, Donovan, what's on your mind?
Hi. Actually, I wanted to talk about the Supreme Court again. It was having to do with the idea that the people should have a say in who the Supreme Court nominee is. And rather than, so my idea, this would probably take, you would probably know this, a constitutional amendment of some kind. But rather than having the Senate confirm the Supreme Court nominee, the president nominates the Congress, which is all of Congress, the representatives and the senators, second the nomination, and then we organize a national vote, up or down, on this person, so that the people actually have a say. And we can be like, no, we don't like them. They're not who we want. Choose somebody else. What do you think of that?
I respectfully disagree. Number one, it would require a modification of the Constitution, so it's not going to happen. But more importantly is the concept. This was the idea of the courts was that they would be nonpartisan, they would be non-political, they wouldn't be beholden to popular opinion. So popular opinion, for example, was, yeah, we've got to have, separate but equal or slavery or whatever. The court wouldn't necessarily go along with that. The court would, be an impartial arbiter, as it were. Now, it hasn't always worked out that way. In fact, it hasn't even usually worked out that way. But the moment that you put Supreme Court justices up for essentially election, and this is why I oppose judicial elections in general, what you're doing is throwing judges into the political scrum, into the political debate. And I think that that's a bad idea, because then they'll be inclined to make promises and cut deals and find supporters, and politics gets very, very ugly. I think that the court should be apolitical, and I think that when Mitch McConnell used this as an excuse, and I'm disappointed, frankly, that the Democrats are simply quoting McConnell's excuse. Instead, they should be saying, you kept us from having our nominee last time. We are going to keep you from having your nominee this time. It's just fair. And once it's done, it's done. That is what, in my opinion, Biden and Harris should be saying. But what they're saying, they're basically quoting Mitch McConnell. And Mitch McConnell invented this thing. He called it the Biden rule because of some offhand remark that Joe Biden had made years ago. But they're referring to it that way. And which I think is just a mistake. I think that what we need to have are Supreme Court justices and judges at all levels that come out of the law. If we're going to listen to anybody with regard to this, it should be the American Bar Association. The American Bar Association has fairly objective criteria to rank the qualifications of judges. Amy Coney Barrett has been a judge for only 2 years, maybe 3. But I believe it's 2 years. In fact, Barack Obama had nominated an African-American woman for the 7th Circuit that Barrett sits on right now, had nominated an African-American woman, and Mitch McConnell blocked that nomination for I believe, a little over a year, and left that seat open, specifically so that Amy Barrett could have that seat. So now you've got the nominee for the Supreme Court is sitting on a stolen seat, and she's going to occupy in the circuit court, and then she's going to occupy a stolen seat on the Supreme Court. I think it's crazy. We'll be back. It's 20 minutes past. Share the Thom Hartmann Program with your friends. We're available on SiriusXM, Free Speech TV, Pacifica, commercial stations nationwide, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, on the Thom Hartmann app, and you can even tell your smart speaker to listen to the Thom Hartmann Program. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, 20 minutes past the hour. Joe in Hopkinsville, Kentucky. Hey, Joe, what's up?
Oh, hey, I'm just so glad to hear the Michigan Attorney General refer to these actions as terrorism, or the perpetrators as terrorists. I've always said that the hate crime category had been created so that we didn't have to call conservative white people terrorists. They reserved that for Muslims and Black Lives Matter or whatever. And this was good, and I think very different. And also it appears that these people, though they've been at it for a while, didn't get the stand back, stand by message that Trump sent out. But that part of it is kind of scary.
Yeah, I agree, and I'm very concerned about this. I think it's a very, the fact that these things are moving into action is very troubling. Joe, thanks for the call. Jeff in Portland. Hey, Jeff, what's up?
Hey, good morning, Tom. Thanks for taking my call, and I totally agree with you on linking this plot to Trump's Michigan, Liberate Michigan shout out. David Sirota wrote a while back about a toxic slime oozing from the White House, and a metaphorical toxic slime, and this is definitely some part of it. But regarding the debate last night, I think it's always helpful to remember the Republicans always attack where they're weakest. So rather than be on the defensive about fracking, which the latest polling in Pennsylvania actually show most people there oppose it, going forward, Biden and Harris, they need to present their climate plan as a massive green jobs and infrastructure program and remind people Trump never delivered on his great infrastructure program. Where's the beef on that? So, and furthermore, Tom, when Trump and Pence try and portray Biden and Harris as puppets of the radical left, let's hope that Kamala and Joe keep exposing Trump as nothing more than the ugly, racist, cruel, ignorant face of oligarchy. He is the oligarch's puppet without the shiny veneer that Reagan put on it. The Trump-Pence vision of America first is billionaires and corporate fat cats first. To the rest of us, they say, let them eat cake. I mean, I would have liked to have seen her say, hey, you're letting all these people suffer, tens of millions of people facing foreclosures and rent evictions and hunger issues. And where's this relief package? You guys have no empathy, no regard for the vast majority of Americans. What do you say, Tom?
Yeah, I think that's very well said, Jeff, and I think that you have identified, exactly what is going on. Thank you. Rick in Baltimore. Hey, Rick, what's up?
Hey, Tom. Really getting sick and tired of seeing Democrat politicians, pundits, strategists go on TV and say, oh, well, we need to beat Trump by a lot. That way he'll accept the defeat. He won't be able to dispute it. No, it doesn't matter if we win by one electoral vote or 100. They don't get a curve. And newsflash, they're not going to care if we win by a landslide. They're not going to care. They're a cult.
No, it's why the Republicans in D.C. right now are having meetings about how to mobilize their own slates of electors in the states that they control, particularly Texas and Florida.
That's
and Pennsylvania.
We got to stop bringing a knife to a gunfight here. I see so many politicians, elected officials on our side going out there and saying, "Well, we need to beat him by a lot." Why do they get to have a curve and we don't? We're setting us up.
Well, I agree that we have to beat him by a lot, Rick, because there's this thing called public opinion. And when public opinion was manipulated in the 2000 election to cause people to think that, well, probably George W. Bush won, so yeah, let's go with that. When in fact the vote, the recount never happened. It took a full year for that recount to happen. It was done by the newspapers, up in New York, and they took all the ballots from Florida up there and they recounted them. It took a whole year. It came out in November of 2001, and the recount showed that Al Gore won Florida in 2000. Al Gore would have won the election if the Supreme Court had not stopped that recount. But it was close enough that, the 500 vote margin, it was close enough that the Republicans were able to push it through, and Al Gore was like, okay, I don't want to cause a constitutional crisis, and, I'll go along with this. I don't want that to happen again. I want it to be absolutely clear and absolutely decisive. But that said, Rick, I completely agree with you. We need to claim every victory we have, even if it's a one-vote victory. I'm with you. Don in Durant, Oklahoma. Hey, Don, what's on your mind?
Yes, Tom. I was wanting to talk about some of the evangelical Christians that say that, God has chosen Trump, so we got to vote for Trump because God chose him. And my point is, Trump turns around and says that he's the chosen one. And then he turns around the other day and says, well, God gave him the coronavirus. And then he turns around because he doesn't get real sick, says, well, God did this for me, but he doesn't do it for everybody. And another point is, did God choose Andrew Jackson that chased the Indians off their land and murdered them? Did God choose Hitler, to do what he did? So God has nothing to do with this election. It's the people of the United States that needs to vote. And that's all I got to say. Thank you.
You're welcome. And very well said, Don. And what you're speaking to here is this pernicious, and by the way, Camp of the Saints in particular, Christianity plays a big role in this, right? It's like this, what an excuse. But Christianity, like almost all other religions, arguably maybe not Buddhism, but Christianity has been used to justify the slaughter of people. Look at the Crusades, for goodness sakes. We'll be back with more of your calls, and as we're kind of processing the last 24 hours, some militias in Michigan to last night's debate.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Back with your calls in just a moment. It's coming up on 28 minutes past the hour.
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Cokeland, The Secret History of Coke Industries and Corporate Power in America by Christopher Leonard. This is from the preface. On May 18th, 1981, 4 Wall Street bankers traveled to Wichita, Kansas. They went there to make an offer to Charles Koch, the CEO of an obscure mid-size energy company. The bankers from Morgan Stanley wanted to convince Koch to take his family's company public, offering shares for sale on the New York Stock Exchange. Their deal was squarely in line with the conventional wisdom of corporate America at the time. Going public was seen as a natural progression for companies like Koch Industries, offering them access to big pools of money and promising enormous paydays for the existing team of executives. All it required from the CEO was to surrender control. Morgan Stanley, in return, would collect a small fortune in fees. Charles Koch was 45 years old. He had run Koch Industries since he was 32 when his father died suddenly. He was trim, tall, and had an athlete's build. He spoke quietly in meetings and seemed almost passive. The bankers laid out their plan to take Koch public. They revealed what, to most executives at least, might have been the most significant detail. If Charles Koch agreed to the deal, he could earn $20 million overnight. The bankers seemed incredulous when they prepared a confidential memo about Koch's reaction. He does not want this cash, the memo reported. Charles Koch calmly explained to them why their offer made no sense. His company was breathtakingly profitable. It operated in vital, deeply complex corners of the American energy industry. During the 1980s, Koch Industries was the largest purchaser and transporter of U.S. crude oil. It owned an oil refinery. It employed teams of commodity traders who bought and sold a wildly diverse menu of raw materials and financial products, from gasoline to paper futures contracts. This might have encouraged most CEOs to take their company public. Koch Industries, however, did not want outsiders to know how much money its traders were earning. Taking the company public would expose too many of its secrets. The memo said, certain of Koch's commodity traders are particularly worried that their high salaries, once disclosed to the public, would be used against them by their trading partners. Secrecy was a strategic necessity for Koch Industries. Charles Koch did not want to surrender it. He also didn't want to surrender control. He had a specific, clear vision of how to run his company, and he didn't need Wall Street investors to interfere. If the bankers expected Charles Koch to go along with the conventional wisdom of their time, then they, like so many outsiders, did not understand him. Beneath his low-key veneer, Charles Koch was, at his core, a fighter. He had unmovable ideas about how things should be, and he did not back down when challenged. When he was challenged by his own brothers for control of Koch Industries, he fought them in a bitter legal battle that lasted decades. When he was challenged by members of a powerful labor union during his first years as CEO, he fought them even as they committed an act of industrial sabotage that nearly destroyed Koch's oil refinery. When the FBI and the U.S. Department of Justice launched a criminal investigation into Koch Industries' oil gathering business, Charles Koch fought them with every legal and political tool at his disposal. When a liberal Congress and President Barack Obama sought to impose regulations on the fossil fuel industry to control greenhouse gas emissions, Charles Koch fought them in ways that changed U.S. politics. In each of these fights, Charles Koch prevailed. When Charles Koch dismissed the bankers in 1981, it was just a small skirmish in the larger war to control Koch Industries. After prevailing in that fight, he created a company that was true to his vision. He avoided the snares that entangled many publicly traded companies that report their financial results to investors every 3 months. Koch Industries didn't have to think quarter to quarter. The company thinks year to year. An internal think tank and deal-making committee called the Development Group will sometimes think through a business deal on a timeline measured in decades. This long-term view made Koch more nimble where other companies stumbled. In 2003, for example, Koch Industries bought a group of money-losing fertilizer plants when no publicly traded company was willing to take the risk. Today, those plants are as profitable as a broken ATM machine that spews out cash around the clock. Unlike publicly traded companies, Koch Industries does not pay out rich dividends to investors. Charles Koch insists on reinvesting at least 90% of the company's profits, fueling its constant expansion. This strategy laid the foundation for decades of continuous growth. Koch Industries expanded continuously by purchasing other companies and branching out into new industries. It specialized in the kind of businesses that are indispensable to modern civilization, but which most consumers never directly encounter. The company is embedded in the hidden infrastructure of everyday life. Millions of people use Koch's products without ever seeing Koch's name attached. Koch refines and distributes fossil fuels, from gasoline to jet fuel, on which the global economy is dependent. Koch is the world's third largest producer of nitrogen fertilizer, which is the cornerstone of our modern food system. Koch makes the synthetic materials used in baby diapers, waistbands, and carpets. It makes the chemicals used for plastic bottles and pipes. It owns Georgia Pacific, which makes the wall panels, beams, and plywood required to build homes and office buildings. It makes napkins, paper towels, stationery, newspaper, and personal hygiene products. Koch Industries owns a network of commodities trading offices in Houston, Moscow, Geneva, and elsewhere, which are the circulatory system of modern finance. The book, Kochland, by Christopher Leonard.
On the Science Revolution this week, Donald Trump has tested positive for COVID-19. What does that mean for America? Dr. Michael Mann is here on Greenland and how it's set to lose more ice than in the past 12,000 years. This is a climate disaster. Gene Ross from National Nurses United drops by about the widespread failure to track and report data on COVID-19 deaths, testing, and infections. Kevin Camps from Beyond Nuclear joins me from New Mexico, begetting a radioactive waste dump. And in Geeky Science, an Awe Walk, AWE, an Awe Walk may do wonders for all of us right now. Tune into the Science Revolution wherever fine podcasts are available. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. If I wasn't explicit, I just want to say this one more time. I am of the opinion that the reason why Mike Lee and other right-wing Republicans, and you will hear this all over the dial if you tune in to right-wing hate radio, are saying that the United States is a republic, not a democracy, is not some arcane debate about what James Madison said back in the 1770s or the 1790s. What it is, plain, simple, right on its face, right in front of us, is Mike Lee and the Republicans preparing us for Donald Trump stealing the election. And saying, you know, we're a republic. We operate under the rules, and the rules say the Electoral College picks, and the Constitution says that Pennsylvania can choose to put Trump and Pence back into office, even if the majority of voters in Pennsylvania say no. And Pennsylvania's legislature has actually created a commission to do just that. And there's other states that are looking at it. And this is no longer a secret. It's being reported like, you know, in mainstream media. So, anyhow, I just, want to be very, very clear about that you get what's going on here, because the stakes are really, really high. Laura in Linwood, Washington. Hey, Laura, what's up?
Well, the gentleman that was on a little while ago talking about the Christians that believe that God made Trump be president. I want to take the story a little further. I had some friends in an apartment building that I was living with, very good friends and good hard workers. We did a lot of stuff, with events and things in our apartment building. And they kept trying to get me to come to their Bible study classes that they had. And one day, one of them told me that when Trump was conceived, God had already divined him to be the Antichrist, and that they were going to vote for him because that was a good thing to do, because God wanted it, because the world is coming to an end. And therefore, they will be Trumpettes and not worry. They won't have to worry about any of these poor people that are in cages down in Mexico and Texas, or all the people that are starving or anything like that, because they're on their way to heaven. And they couldn't understand why I just couldn't believe that. I said to them, I said, I don't think my God did that. I don't know what God you believe in. And they said, we'll pray for you, to me. And 2 months later, I moved. I couldn't stand to be around them. And
this is not really new, Laura. I'm sorry, finish your thought.
That's all right. They're kind, gentle people, and I can't believe how they could just, it's okay. Everything that's going on is okay, because they're going to go to heaven pretty soon. They're going to, it'll be over with this world.
This is not new, Laura. This kind of thinking has been around for quite some time. It really gained a foothold in the American consciousness, and Western European too, for that matter, in the late 1800s. There was this huge religious revival in the 1870s, 1880s, and early 1890s, out of which came the Seventh-day Adventist movement, Ellen White, who said the world is going to end, and took her flock up to the top of the mountain to watch the world end, and it didn't happen, and so she kind of reinvented the religion. It brought us the Jehovah's Witnesses. There are a number of smaller sects in Christianity that emerged out of that, and kind of laid the foundation for things like, Hal Lindsey's 1972, I think it was, book, The Late Great Planet Earth, in which he's saying that, biblical prophecy means that we're in the end days and all this kind of thing. And in fact, in the 1980s, when James Watt was the Interior Secretary under Ronald Reagan, right now our Interior Secretary is a guy who used to be a coal lobbyist. He's selling off our public lands just like James Watt was. And James Watt was selling off federal public lands to mining and drilling interests for pennies on the dollar. These guys were making an absolute killing and pouring contributions into the Republican Party. And a reporter cornered James Watt and said, "You're despoiling America. You're ruining our national lands. Why would you do that?" And James Watt said, and I'm paraphrasing, but it's easy enough to find the exact quote. He said, "We're on the verge of the rapture. And when Jesus returns, he's going to make all things new. So it doesn't matter what we do to the earth, because Jesus is going to make it all pristine once again." And that kind of thinking is exactly what you're describing there, Laura. I'm hearing two stories from Christians, from befuddled, deluded Christians about Donald Trump. The first is the story that you're telling, which is he's actually the bad guy. And he's here to screw things up, because you've got to have that war. You've got to have that war that starts in Armageddon before you can have the return of Jesus. And then the other, and that's not the most common story among Christians, but it's out there. The more common one is the King Cyrus story. King Cyrus was, I believe, a Persian, an Iranian king who took in the Jews when they were being persecuted and didn't try to convert them. They didn't convert him, so he was never, one of us kind of thing, or even explicitly on our side, but he protected people, through the process. And so what they're saying is, Donald Trump is not a moral man. He's not a Christian. He's an adulterer. He's a thief. He's broken virtually every one of the 10 Commandments. He doesn't read the Bible. He doesn't even, 2 Thessalonians, really, that kind of thing. But he may be an SOB, but he's our SOB. He's our King Cyrus. And both of those stories, I think, are just incredible. incredibly destructive. And it's so unfortunate they're being promoted. And then now you add a third one to that, which is the whole QAnon thing, which is also claiming to be rooted in Christianity, saying that, there's Hollywood celebrities and Democrats who are eating children, drinking their blood. This is the old story, literally, that was in the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, which was written in 1902 by Tsar Nicholas's intelligence services to provide an excuse for Tsar Nicholas to crack down on Jewish moneylenders and bankers in Russia in 1902, and it's just, and they were in many cases presenting some of the opposition to him, to the extent that it was, and that's what Hitler used. I mean, the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, Hitler required it. He republished it. It had to be read by school children. There were movies about it. And it basically said the Jews are eating children. They're taking the blood of children and using it to make matzah, which they use for the high holy holidays. And this has been reprised, reinvented with a patina of last days-ness to it as part of the QAnon conspiracy. And we got some really toxic stuff going on here. And Laura, thank you for the call and for highlighting that. The point that I think the larger point here is people are wondering, why have we gone nuts, right? Why is this happening? And I think it's a very straightforward answer, and it's what, I quoted Tucker Carlson earlier as pointing out, that America has become unbalanced. That is to say, the rich are obscene, the top 1% own 79.3% of all the wealth in America. The bottom half of us own 1.5% of the wealth in America. And when that happens, when people feel like, hey, I should have a good life. My dad had a good life. He worked at a tool and die shop for 40 years. He retired. He owned his own home. He took vacation. Why can't I have that? When people are asking that question, the easy answer is, because somebody did it to you. Because there's some group out there that's conspiring against you. And the story that Donald Trump told white American voters was, it's brown people. It's immigrants who are stealing your job. That's who it is. So we should put their children in cages. And back when it was Ronald Reagan was saying, oh, it's black people. Reagan said, doesn't it, I'm paraphrasing, but you can look up his quote, doesn't it infuriate you when you're standing in line at the supermarket, with the money that you've carefully saved, and right in front of you is some big young buck, which was his phrase for a black man, buying beer and pretzels, or I forget exactly what he described, but it was, not veggies and fruit, with his food stamps. And then Reagan went off on his welfare queen thing about the black woman who had the Cadillac and had 100 different Social Security accounts, which didn't exist. But when people feel like they are getting the short end of the stick, and middle class, working class people in America have been getting the short end of the stick for 40 years now as a consequence of Reaganomics, they don't look at large structural issues like, hey, did somebody change how our economy works? No, instead they look at groups of people. Oh, it's them. And the QAnon people are saying, oh, it's Democrats.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
And this is how you end up with armed militias threatening, conspiring to kidnap a governor of a state. And welcome back. Let's see here. Jessica in Chicago watching Free Speech TV. Hey, Jessica, what's up?
Hi, Tom. On a lighter note, we did a social distance watch party last night, and we planned on drinking. We planned on drinking when Pence would interrupt Harris, and we'd have a shot. But when the fly landed, we were all like texting, "Hey, there's a fly on his head," and we said, "Let's drink till the fly leaves." So, needless to say, the fly wasn't going anywhere, and we got smashed. But
So you are hungover?
A little, yeah. And I think Pence has COVID. If you look at his eye, it's insane. And I was on steroids.
They came out this morning and said that he just tested negative for COVID. So hopefully that's the case. Forgive the interruption, Jessica. Go continue.
Oh, I was on steroids 3 different times, and I wanted to beg my doctor, please don't take me off. So every ache and pain went away, and Trump, no wonder he's loving it. He's older, and he's not going to like coming off.
Yeah, and that was my experience too, and we've had so many people call in and say the same thing. And I think it's affecting his brain. I think he's experiencing mania right now, and I am very, very, very concerned about when that mania turns into depression. Jessica, thank you for the call. Susan in Inglis, Florida. Hey, Susan, thanks for watching Free Speech TV. What's up?
Hey, Tom, I want to refer back to a few phone calls ago. You were talking about the SCOTUS and, people voting for retaining judges and so forth. I noticed on my Florida ballot, down ballot, we have a lot of district judges, and I have trouble trying to find any kind of, record of how they would judge a case, different cases and so forth, or, where they even came from. So I always vote not to retain them. And I was wondering, because this is a lower, district, local cases kind of thing, and not a federal, if this is a wise thing, type thing, because, we really don't have any say of who gets appointed. It's just we have a say of if we're going to keep them, but we don't have any idea of, what their record is.
Susan, what I do here
what your
in
opinion
Oregon,
on this would be.
Sure. Oregon publishes a fairly comprehensive voter guide where they give, several paragraphs of background on each one of the candidates, including judges. And so I read that, and if I'm still wondering what to do, I also check with the local Democratic Party. They've got a website here. And we've got 2 weekly newspapers, the Portland Mercury and Willamette Week, here in Portland. And both of them have a progressive tilt to them. And so I look up there, and they publish voter guides. And so I look at their voter guides. And by that point in time, I typically feel like I've got a fairly well-rounded understanding of who these people are and how they would determine cases. And then I vote. I don't know how it works in Florida, and I don't know what resources you have, but those are the places I would start. Susan, thank you for the call. It's nice to hear from you. We'll be right back. The Hidden History of Monopoly tells how Robert Bork, that guy from the Reagan era, transformed corporate America and destroyed the American dream. It's 10 minutes before the hour. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Wayne in Fort St. John, British Columbia, Canada. Hey, Wayne, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, how's it going?
Good.
Hey, Tom, how are you? Can you hear me?
I am fine, Wayne. There's about a half a second delay between us because of, latency on the internets and things. So just start talking. Go for it. You're just fine.
Okay. I like the way Kamala stood up for open borders and free health care, and she's correct. There are too many racist babies around, and Trump is a reptilian alien. And
okay, all right, Wayne. Thank you very much. Brian in Middletown, New Jersey. Hey, Brian, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, how you doing? Listen, I know you've talked about this before, but we got to get the message out. The Republicans are not better for the economy than Democrats. The history proves that. Every GOP president, Hoover's had a recession. The economy was on the downswing. The last print in 2019, GDP was 2.1%. Every year was lower than the previous one. His average was 2.5 for 3 years. The post-war average is 3.1. It's a joke. And last night, I think she missed an opportunity because he then repeated another one of his lies, that the economy was the greatest ever before COVID. That is an absolute lie, and I wish she had jumped on that and countered it.
Yeah. You know, there were a number of times where I knew, and I'm sure that Kamala Harris knew, what the line was that would be the knife going into Mike Pence rhetorically on some of his lies. And there were times when she called him out, but she did it in, you know, from eye rolls to you know, right, just explicit. But like I said earlier, I think that her main job was to not disrupt things, to just, you know, because literally every day, or at least every 3 or 4 days, as the new polls come out, Trump gets farther and farther away from getting reelected. I mean, it's like there's a 16-point spread in some polls right now in favor of Joe Biden. I don't recall any time in my lifetime I've seen anything like this. I mean, this could be the biggest blowout in the history of American politics, or right up there. And so her job was to not derail that process. And I think by being a little calmer than she normally would be, because she can, you know, we all know Kamala Harris has the ability to put the knife in, you know, maybe that's a terrible metaphor, but you know, look at what she did to Joe Biden in the debates, where you know, she basically told him that, you know, he was tough on her as a little kid. She was that little black kid who had to, you know, who got ahead because of busing that Joe Biden had opposed way back in the day. So, you know, I get it that's possible, and I get it how easy it is to critique her or criticize her. But her main job was to keep things going, and I thought she did a pretty good job of it. Thanks for the call. Jeff in Tippin, Ohio. Hey, Jeff, what's on your mind today?
Yeah, Tom, I agree with virtually everything you say, but one thing I haven't heard on any talk shows is about Trump's military record. And, you know, I was in the military, and the big thing about me when I was in the military is I was government property. If I went to a bar and got in a fight and got hurt, and I couldn't show up for my duty, I was in trouble. Mm-hmm. Same way with getting sick somehow. You know what I'm saying? Here he is, the commander-in-chief of our United States forces, and he's got the finger on the button for the nuclear launch or whatever, and he's getting sick. And it's his own fault. So yeah, I would have done that in the Navy if I got hurt. I'd have got busted. I'd got a stripe taken away. I'd have got paid, fined, you know, all that stuff. And there he is. He's getting sick, and he's leading the military, and you don't have any military people coming out and saying that was wrong, him getting sick. Yeah,
not only has he gotten sick, but he has apparently spread this disease to other people. And I think the place where we're it depends on whether these multimillionaires and billionaires that he met with in Bedminster, New Jersey, are willing to take on Donald Trump. But I'm guessing probably most of them are well north of 50 years old, probably many of them well north of 60 and even 70 years old, because typically to amass enough money that you can pay $250,000 to go to a presidential fundraiser, you know, it takes a lifetime or it takes a lot of years. And if one of them gets sick and one of them dies, then even if that person, you know, who is loyal to Trump doesn't want to talk about it, their family may well want to talk about it, and they may have some sort of a legal cause of action against Donald Trump. I mean, I can't say that for sure because he's protected by sovereign immunity to a certain extent, the decisions that he makes. But this was he was not there as president of the United States. He was there as candidate Trump. This was a fundraiser, not a public event. So I think that it might be possible for a good lawyer to puncture that and go after Donald Trump. Now that doesn't get to your issue with the military, Jeff. I'm hearing, you know, the polling that I'm seeing, and there's not a lot of it coming out of the military, but basically the officer corps has been opposed to Donald Trump for a long, long time, and right now you've got some of the some of the among the enlisted corps men and women, it's increasing. The opposition is increasing. But what's your sense of how the military, or are you no longer connected to your military buddies?
No, I was a union member, and I'm retired. I'm about 66, but I don't talk, but I talk to veterans, and it just amazes me how none of these veterans, like in Northwest Ohio here, are bad. A lot of them think Trump is great yet, and there he determines to stay out of Vietnam, and never had his foot operated on, and calling our soldiers losers and suckers, and the bounty on the, that irritates me, and it should irritate every veteran.
Well, I agree. It reflects the tribalism that has happened to our politics as a result of the stakes going up so high. Jeff, thanks a lot for the call. It's great to hear from you. And thank you for being with us today. We'll be back tomorrow, same time, same place. In the meantime, don't forget, democracy is not a spectator sport. It requires you. So please, check your voter registration at iwillvote.com and get as many people as you can to make sure that they're registered to vote, and start voting and vote if it's the time to do it in your state. We'll continue this conversation tomorrow on Anything Goes Friday. Have a great afternoon. Be good to yourself and others. Tag you're it. See you tomorrow.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are Gabi.com. Gabi takes the pain out of insurance shopping. More info at Gabi.com/Tom. Boll and Branch Sheets, crafted for the common good. More info at bollandbranch.com, code Tom. CB Distillery for sleeping. More info at cbdistillery.com, code Tom. The Clean Phone Pro, phone sanitizer and charger. More info at thenewdealshop.com. ExpressVPN, the VPN that just works. More information at expressvpn.com/Tom. And Teeth, Smarter Pet Dental Health. For more information, teethhealth.com, code Tom.
We say